6 p.m. And so I want to thank everyone for joining for this July 13th Louisville City Council meeting. I'm Mayor Ashley Stolzman, and because of COVID-19, this meeting is being held electronically and is being recorded. To request permission to speak during public comment periods, an attendee must raise their hand by clicking the raise hand feature, which you'll find at the bottom of the screen. Attendees who are calling in can dial *9 on their phone and we'll see a raise hand appear on your behalf. When I acknowledge a member of the public and our clerk unmutes you, you'll need to tell us your name, address, and your question or concern. Each person will have 3 minutes for their comments, and if you wish to speak on another topic, you'll need to raise your hand again. I will say there are 3 items at the end of the agenda that are first readings, and what a first reading is really just to set the public hearing for a future date, so we tell you what date we'll have the hearing. So on those agenda items, we'll be setting the date for the future meeting when people will be able to comment. And the reason I bring this up is the paper posted that we'd be discussing and taking comment on on Red Tail Ridge, and I just want folks to know that that is really before us on first reading this evening to set the hearing for a future date. And I'll let folks know again through the meeting, especially if I see a big spike in attendance. And with that, I would like to thank everyone for helping us to maintain meeting decorum by following all these rules. And I'll ask the city clerk for a roll call.
Mayor Stolzman?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney?
Here.
Councilmember Brown?
Here.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Here.
Councilmember Fahey?
Here.
Councilmember Lay?
Here.
Councilmember Lipton?
And Councilmember Lipton, we didn't hear you, but I see you there. And so with that, that takes us to our next item, which is an approval of the agenda. Could I please get a motion to approve?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion of the agenda tonight? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. That takes us to public comment tonight for items that are not on our agenda or for items that are on our consent agenda. So I would request folks limit their comments to 3 minutes, and when you start speaking, you'll see a timer appear. So go ahead and raise your hand at this time if you have a comment on an agenda, on a topic that's not on our agenda, should I say. Our first commenter this evening is from Jordan Bear.
Hi, this is Jordan Bear. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I live at 1101 Spruce Street, Louisville, 80027. My topic tonight is railroad quiet zones. So chronic lack of sleep is known to cause lack of alertness, excessive sleepiness, impaired memory, irritability, decreased quality of life, increased likelihood of car accidents, decline academic performance, and put you at high risk for high blood pressure, diabetes, heart attack, heart failure, stroke, obesity, depression, immunity impairment, and lower sex drive. So I would like to, and one thing that's really impacting quality of sleep for residents of Louisville is the railroad that comes through sometimes once a night, sometimes twice a night, sometimes not at all. But it's a chronic problem that I have noticed. So I would like to propose implementing a new partial quiet zone from 10 p.m. to 7 a.m. at the railroad crossings at South Boulder Road and Pine Street. These crossings are 0.9 miles apart. The Federal Railroad Association says that a quiet zone must be at least 0.5 miles, so it would satisfy that. I looked at the federal regulations at railroads.dot.gov and saw that a new quiet zone must have at minimum flashing lights and gates in place at crossing. Both of these crossings currently have that. They also must be equipped with constant warning time devices where practical and power out indicators. And I'm not sure if they have those. And upgrades would have to be completed before you can calculate risk. Once risk is calculated, you compare it to the national significant risk threshold to see if it would qualify for automatic renewal. Otherwise, additional supplementary safety measures or alternate safety measures would have to be implemented to lower the quiet zone risk index before it could be federally approved. So I guess my question is, or this is something I would like City Council to consider. This is my first City Council meeting, and I'm not really sure what happens after I make a proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. And just for all the members of the public, we don't respond during the public comment section, but there is a council comments section following the consent agenda, so very shortly. So I would encourage everyone to stay tuned, and I can talk more about what happens with public comments in general at that time and make any general comments. So our next member of the public that has a comment for us this evening is Bob L.
Need to unmute on your end, Bob, please.
How about that? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. I viewed the consortium of cities, Boulder County last week, and resulting from that viewing, I asked questions of my two representatives on that meeting, Councilpersons Brown and Lay. I received a message back from Councilperson Brown. It did not answer my questions. It simply repeated the same items that were covered during the meeting. So at this time, I would like to request Councilpersons Brown and Lee, please review the email that I sent them, and so that I can get a better feeling of where they stand and what they propose in terms of this consortium of cities. Please respond to the 4 questions I asked each of you. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm not seeing any other members of the public with comments, so that will take us to our consent agenda this evening. Could I please get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So move.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion of the consent agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. The motion carries. And that takes us to our council informational comments on pertinent items that are not on the agenda. So we'll just start off by thanking the members of the public who commented, and we really appreciate public comment. Sometimes we're able to get a comment back to someone right shortly. If they tell us their name and address, staff writes it down and we can get in touch with them about their issue, like if it's about a code enforcement issue, about a pothole or something like that, and we can get it to the right department and taken care of right away. Sometimes there are more complicated issues that the public brings to our attention that start, working their way through our capital projects process and things like that, and ultimately can result in improvements in the city. I'm happy to report to Jordan and other members of the community that we've been working on a railroad quiet zones project for several years, and we recently poured some new concrete for improvements that are required for our quiet zones and are installing those types of upgrades that Jordan was telling us about. And the project is well underway, and we're hopeful that it'll be completed fourth quarter, tested first quarter of next year, and then done. So we'll have railroad quiet zones in our community, and that will be at Baseline, Pine, Dillon, Griffith, and South Boulder Road. And so I really want to thank Jordan for the suggestion and the other community members who have brought the suggestion forward, and we are working through that process and trying to deliver on that. So thank you. And with that, I'll turn over to other council members that may have comments on pertinent items that are not on the agenda. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate that. And I just wanted to respond to Bob and his comments and just say that I apologize that my email wasn't clear. No proposals have been formulated at this point. I'd be happy to follow up with him in more detail via email. So thank you.
Great, thank you, everyone. So with that, I'll turn it over to the city manager's report. City Manager Balser.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I just wanted to thank all the staff and the community and the council members who participated in the 4th of July and the preparation for that. It was the fireworks were beautiful, and it was great to bring that event back. And also lots of folks at the different viewing sites that we had. And I believe the community had a good evening. So I just want to thank everyone for all their work to make that happen. So thank you.
Thank you very much, City Manager Balser. And I just have one more housekeeping item before we move to the next agenda item, and just double checking with Councilmember Fahey. Councilmember Fahey, is your hand raised right now? I just want to make sure I have you in the right part of my screen. So I see you in the panelist list, but I also see a couple other Faheys, and I just want to make sure I know where you are.
My hand is not raised.
Okay, thank you very much. Just making sure I understood. All right, so that takes us to our first order of business this evening, which is resolution number 44, series 2021, a resolution approving a business assistance agreement with C2X Group, LLC, DBA Louisville Beer Garden for an economic development project in the city of Louisville. Our Economic Vitality Director, Megan Pierce, is on to tell us more. Hi, Megan.
Sorry, working on getting my screens arranged. Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Give me just a second. All right. Okay, so first item this evening, we have 2 business assistance agreements we're going to consider, but first up is one.
Megan, sorry for interrupting you. I just want to let you know that we can see your notes section, and it's not a problem, but I just wanted you to know that.
Yep, I can work on that. Sorry about that. All right. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I appreciate the heads up. So C2X Group LLC is the applicant for the first business assistance agreement. They are doing business as Louisville Beer Garden. Just a little bit of background on this group. They are currently seeking a flagship location for their Rocky Mountain Beer Garden concept, doing business as Louisville Beer Garden. James Martell is the CEO of C2X Group LLC. I've been working with James Browder, who is the company's COO on this application. The company is interested in leasing the former Growler USA space at 1069, 1071 Courtesy Road. And they're still evaluating other potential locations where the project could go, including Fort Collins, Johnstown, and Dillon. The company would occupy just about 3,200 square feet of indoor commercial space. They're also potentially working on how they would incorporate outdoor space into their concept. They anticipate doing some minor renovation work at the location and hope to open later this year. They would expect to have about 16 to 24 employees at the restaurant, and those would have average job salaries of $45,000. Staff finds that the proposed application meets our business assistance program criteria, including drawing new customers and not expected to draw a large percentage of its business from existing businesses, seeing that there was previously a similar concept at the same location. It would create new sales tax revenue to the city, utilize an existing vacant facility, and would also bring new basic jobs. The proposed assistance that's outlined in the materials for you tonight includes a 50% rebate of building permit fees and construction use tax that would be on that tenant finish work that they anticipate completing. That proposed assistance is capped at $3,000. There's also proposed a rebate on new sales tax generated over a 5-year period at 50%. That would be capped at $190,000. The business would need to commence its operations no later than June 30th of next year in order to be eligible for that assistance. And then the caveat in the agreement is that they would need to remain in Louisville in business for 7 years, or they would need to pay back a percentage of those rebates received. Overall financial impact to the city, the rebates of building permit fees and construction use tax would be just over $2,800, but the city would also receive revenues of close to $6,300. And based on estimates provided by the applicant in terms of their projected sales, the business would pay just under $460,000 in sales tax over a 5-year period, and we estimate that we would rebate $189,000 of that. So total impact over a 5-year period is $191,820. A resolution is included with your materials tonight, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Director Pierce. And so with that, we will go to public comments on this agenda item tonight. Any members of the public care to comment? All right, seeing none, that takes us back over for council questions or comments. Any council members have questions or comments this evening or motions? Councilmember Brown.
Sorry, I didn't get my hand up there, but I was mumbling. I'd like to make a motion that we approve resolution number 44, series 2020.
Second, and I'll just, series 2021, right?
2021, excuse me. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I accept that friendly amendment. And did you want to speak to your motion, Councilmember Brown?
No, I just think it's not sure. I mean, yes, I would like to speak to my motion. I'm having a little trouble this morning today. I think it's an exciting project. I think it's the kind of project that's going to bring people to Louisville. You know, it's a currently vacant space, and there, you know, the promise of being able to employ additional people is always exciting. So I'm excited about this particular project.
Thank you for that. And I don't know if the applicant is on, but I just want to add my excitement for the project. Really, really great vision. It seems like a fantastic place to have a beer garden with the open space and all the commuters and the walking traffic that we get from the Delo area. So it's really exciting, and I hope they choose Louisville and look forward to that. If they're not on, Director Pierce, if you could convey our sentiments to them about our excitement. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Just for clarification, has this been seconded yet?
Yes.
Okay.
I second.
All right. I'll third it if that helps at all. I also am very excited about this project as well. I'm always excited when we fill space, and it seems like this is a perfect fit with that current space. I did have a curiosity question for Director Pierce. On the first page of the staff report, on the last paragraph, talk about the estimated generated gross sales revenues over 5 years. And if I compare that to the previous business that was there, their business model must be very different than the previous tenant who was there, because these numbers far exceed the yearly sales. And I was just wondering if that may be an unfair question. If you have an answer, I'd love to hear it. If you don't have an answer to that, that's okay too. But I was just curious because the numbers are very, very different.
Yes, they are, and we do rely on the estimates provided by the applicant, but then that's one reason it's helpful to have the cap, because sometimes those estimates might be generous compared to what our expectations may be. So depending on the business model, but you are correct, it would be a much more successful tenant in that space compared to the prior one if they were able to generate revenues at that level compared to what I've seen in the history reports.
Well, I look forward to their success. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you very much. So seeing no other discussion, I'll ask for a roll call from our city clerk.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Fahey,
Yes.
Councilmember Lipton.
Yes.
Mayor Stolzman,
Yes.
Councilmember Leahy. I'm sorry, Councilmember Lay,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney,
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. Our next agenda item, and so that agenda item passes unanimously. That takes us to our next agenda item, resolution number 45, series 2021, a resolution approving a business assistance agreement with Studio Shed Acquisition LLC for an economic development project in the city of Louisville. We'll have a staff presentation again from Director Pierce.
Okay, hopefully I get my correct screen this time. Sorry, having a little bit of trouble.
It's just fine. All the computers are not used to us being back from holiday.
Okay, sometimes you just need to close and start over. Okay. So we're going to go this way this time because it's being a little uncooperative. So the second business assistance package that I have before you tonight is for an existing business. This is Studio Shed Acquisition LLC. They do business in Louisville currently as Studio Shed, if you're familiar with them. So they are currently located at 1500 Cherry Street, Studio S, which is in the Colorado Technology Center. They've been operating in Louisville for over a decade now. The company designs and produces panelized buildings. These have become immensely popular, and we're probably more aware of them in the last several years in terms of, she sheds and accessory dwelling units. But they produce these products in Louisville as complete packages and ship them all over the world. So they're doing business nationally and internationally. Adjacent commercial space has become available in their existing facility, and so they're using this as an opportunity that they would like to expand and grow. They had been pursuing a potential relocation to Broomfield because they weren't certain that they could get additional commercial space that's needed in Louisville. In terms of a little more background on the project, Studio Shed currently has 18,500 square feet. This expansion would allow them to get close to 30,000 square feet. It would really be a significant renovation of their existing production space. I had the opportunity to tour it with them, and their workflow doesn't work as efficiently as they would like it to. They don't have all the components in place in the places they would like them. And they also would be able to invest in new capital and machinery that they currently don't have space for. They have 40 people working in Louisville facility today, spanning sales and marketing to their production staff. They would hope to grow to about 70 employees with this expansion, and the average job salary at the company is $52,000. Staff finds that the project proposed meets our business assistance program criteria. It would retain basic jobs in the city. It would retain existing sales tax and potentially create new sales tax and use tax. It utilizes an existing building that will, this space will soon become vacant from a prior tenant. And then it also represents job diversity in an industry that's growing. The proposed assistance package includes a 50% rebate of building permit fees and construction use tax. So this is for their tenant finish work of the renovated additional space they hope to acquire. That's capped at $3,500. The proposed 50% rebate on use tax, which would be over a 5-year period. And this is going to be for really the capital and the materials they're going to be bringing in for the facility as part of their expansion. Those rebates are capped at $18,000. Studio Shed would need to complete their expansion by August 30th of next year. And similar to the prior agreement we discussed, they would need to remain in Louisville in business for 7 years or pay back a portion of those rebates received. In terms of the overall financial impact, the rebates of building permit fees and construction use tax would be just under $3,500, but the city would have revenues just about $7,700 for that project. And based on estimates provided by the applicant, they would be paying about $34,500 in use tax over a 5-year period, and then $17,250 of that would be rebated. So the total fiscal impact is $20,693 over a 5-year period. Again, you have a resolution before you for this assistance package, and I'm happy to answer any questions about the application.
Thank you very much, Director Pierce. That takes us to our public comment section on this agenda item. Any members of the public care to comment on this agenda topic? Seeing none, council questions and comments. Councilmember Dickinson.
Thanks, Mayor. I would just move that we approve resolution number 45, series 2021, and see if there's any other comments.
Thank you, Councilmember Fahey.
I would just like to second Councilor Dickinson's proposal.
Thank you, Councilmember Dickinson. Would you like to speak to your motion?
Thanks, Mayor. Yeah, I just think it's fantastic. It's always nice to have a local business doing well and wanting to expand. And I think it's very fortunate that the spot next to him became available. And I really hope they're able to keep growing and being successful. And yeah, it seems like a very great business model they have right now, and excited for their success and that they're growing.
Thank you very much for the sentiments. Any other comments? All right, seeing none, could we please have a roll call vote from our city clerk?
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney,
Yes.
Mayor Stolzman,
Yes.
Councilmember Lay,
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Yes.
Councilmember Fahey,
Yes.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Councilmember Lipton.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. The motion carries. That takes us to our next item of business this evening, which is resolution number 46, series 2021. A resolution approving 1, a planned unit development amendment and special review use to allow conversion of a portion of the existing building to include up to 5 dwelling units and a residential development with 3 dwelling units. And 2, a final plat to consolidate lots for property located at 950 Spruce Street and 725 Front Street, lots 1 and 2, and a portion of lot 3, block 3, town of Louisville. I'd like to open the public hearing and ask council members if there are any disclosures. Seeing none, I'll turn it over to our Director of Planning for a staff presentation.
Good evening, Mayor, members of City Council. Rob Zucchero with the Planning Department. I'm going to be making the staff presentation on this project. Hopefully you can see my screen. This request has 3 parts. It is for a planned unit development, so that's for the site development, a special review use for a proposed residential use, and then a final plat to consolidate lots on the property. So this property is southwest of Spruce and Front. And I'll go a little bit into the history here, but it's kind of right in the heart of downtown. This was originally, this building where part of the development is going to take place was constructed in 1984. It's called the Fisher Building. It was converted to the city library in 1989. When the city built its new library across the street, it was converted back to commercial use and expanded in 2006. And so it's pretty much where it is today. It's about a little over 14,000 square foot office and commercial building on the corner there. What is being proposed on the property is to convert the existing building, the existing Fisher Building, on the 2nd floor to allow residential uses. So that would be between 3 and 5 residential uses. They're asking for some flexibility on that. So there could be either all residential uses or a mix of office and residential on that 2nd floor. They're proposing some changes to the building, including some operable windows and some balconies on that 2nd floor, as well as some storage and deck additions off the back of the building to accommodate those residential uses. The proposal also includes closing the parking lot where it accesses Front Street and adding 3 row homes at that location as well. So they would actually be improving the streetscape as well. They'd be extending the brick banding, adding street trees, and adding a couple of parking spaces on the street. They'd be reconfiguring the parking lot in the back here, adding some compact parking spaces, expanding the trash enclosure to include recycling and compost, adding some landscaping as well. So here are the elevations that are being proposed. So this is as if you were standing on the east side of the building facing west. So this is the Fisher Building. There would be, you could see where some of the deck and storage additions would be. And then you can see where the 3 row homes are being proposed within the existing parking lot. This is from the south looking north. You can see the side of the new row homes and then the back side of the building. And this is the back of the row homes. They would all have garages on that 1st floor. So the row homes are proposed at 3 stories and 36 feet in height. They are a little over 7,000 square feet in total, including the garages. So they would include stucco and brick and gray metal panel on those buildings. There is one waiver request associated with the PUD. There's a request to allow signs for the 3 row homes if they have home occupations. So this is different than live work. So if you're familiar with our live work code, within downtown, if you do have a residential use and you have a minimum amount of the property dedicated to a commercial use, you can have a live work unit, and there's a wide range of uses. That isn't what they're proposing. They're proposing if you have a home occupation, which are allowed in all residential properties throughout the city. So that might be something like an accountant's office or a counselor's office, or somebody who's teaching, let's say, music lessons. These are some of the residential home occupations we might see. They are asking for an allowance to have a sign. Typically, signs are prohibited for any home occupation. And so they're proposing an allowance for that, since this is in a commercial area of the city. And so if the waiver was approved, they would be limited in dimension, and they'd have to, they would have to meet this design. So there'd be flexibility in the design of the sign, but they'd have to meet these dimensional requirements and the metal frame requirement. Just a little bit about the special review use. So within this zone district, the CC zone district, which all of our commercial area in downtown is within, multifamily residential is only allowed through a special review use. So that is part of that does need to be part of their proposal. Again, they want to request flexibility. Here's for that second floor of the Fisher building. So you can see what they're proposing would be to have 3, so that's kind of the stippled pattern here. So 3 residential units, and then the interior units that are the crosshatch, that they want to ask that those could flex between commercial and residential uses. And then of course, here are the 3 row homes facing Front Street. I do want to mention a note that's on the SRU. There is a note that tries to clarify the stipulation within any special review use within the city. So special review uses, if they are discontinued for more than a year, then they lose their right to that use. So you're probably most familiar with outdoor dining as a special review use, for example. So if a restaurant had an outdoor dining area and they abandoned that outdoor dining for more than a year, they'd lose that use, and they'd have to come back to city council and ask for that use again. Well, any special review use, including this residential use, would be subject to that requirement. In working with the applicant, the question arose wanting to have flexibility on the second floor of the Fisher building, where properties could transfer between commercial and residential. They wanted to clarify that and really request, I think, this note that would mean, if, let's say, one of these commercial office properties on the second floor, were to be a residential use, and then maybe it turns into an office for more than a year, that they wouldn't lose that right to have that residential use. So as long as there was at least one residential use on that second floor, they would maintain their special review use approval for up to 5 residential units on that second floor. Now, if for some reason there were no residential units for over a year, in totality on that second floor, they would lose that right, and they'd have to come back if they wanted to have residential uses there again. So staff analysis, there's a significant amount of staff analysis in the staff report. We looked at the downtown design handbook pretty extensively. There's the downtown Louisville framework plan, of course, our PUD and SRU review criteria, and then we do have a final plat. So there are staff recommended findings in the staff report. I'm just going to summarize some of our findings. So within the design handbook, there's a core area and a transition area of downtown. So as you can see in this map, the blue outlined area is the core area. And then this cross-hatched area is the transition area. And there's different allowances and policies for each of these areas. So in red is where we have this proposed development. It is in the core area. So typically this area allows higher density development. You're allowed to have 3 stories instead of 2 stories. And that's qualified in other parts of the code that I'll talk about, and potentially up to 45 feet and a floor area ratio of 2.0. So this proposal is right about a 1.0 floor area ratio. So they're within that. They are 3 stories and they're within the 45 feet at 36 feet. So in staff's review against the design handbook policies, which are extensive design standards for buildings in downtown, we are finding that this does enhance the downtown character. It helps close a driveway cut on Front Street, which really helps with the streetscape. It makes it much more pedestrian friendly. We worked a lot with the architect on the use of materials and the massing of the building. As this is a side view, you can kind of see the street edge and how the building steps back to the 3rd story. We really worked on having, what the design handbook calls kind of coarser, heavier materials to define that streetscape, traditional materials that you might find downtown as well. And it does say the third story should appear subordinate, and that buildings should really have, they should appear as 1 and 2 story buildings predominantly on the streetscape. So this brick portion here is about 26 feet, which really defines the streetscape before you step back to the third story stucco. So on the height, as I mentioned, the design guidelines suggest you could have up to 45 feet and 3 stories, but there is, in the municipal code, there is this section that qualifies that the city may require smaller height, lower heights of buildings to ensure varied building heights and the appearance of a 2-story building mass from the street pedestrian scale. So in staff's review and our recommended findings, we are finding that this code and all of those design standards for downtown are met. A little bit on the special review use criteria. The comprehensive plan does support a mix of uses within centers. So this is one of our centers in the comprehensive plan. So we do have policies promoting pedestrian scale development, which we believe this meets. The framework plan supports a mix of residential uses. It does say that the core area should be maintained as a primarily commercial core, but that residential mixed use would be appropriate with limited residential use within that core area. We have very little residential use in the core area now, so this would provide some mixed use. It would really help activate the area, providing economic stability in staff's review. Staff does find the sign waiver request meets the standard. The design is of a higher quality sign. It helps complement the pedestrian and commercial character of the area. It's very unique. We certainly wouldn't want signs in our more suburban areas with these types of home occupations, but in this area, it could be appropriate with as long as the design complements downtown. On the final plat, we do find that it does comply with all of our subdivision and zoning regulations. No new easements are needed. This is purely to consolidate the lot boundaries, so it's one single lot to facilitate the development. Downtown development cap within our ordinances, we have a cap of 475,000 square feet within the westerly portion of downtown, so that's everything west of the railroad tracks. Counting existing floor area and approved, that is either under construction or has an active PUD. And if we add this proposal, we're at a little under 350,000 square feet. So we're well below the development cap that was set in the code. So the Historic Preservation Commission did review this. We do take downtown developments to the Historic Preservation Commission. We asked them to really review it with the lens of the design guidelines that relate to the historic and traditional context of downtown. They did recommend 4-to-1. They voted 4-to-1 to recommend approval. They did see a different design than is being presented this evening, so I wanted to note that. You can see on here, there's kind of a different mass. They're very similar, but there was definitely a different massing and use of materials. But based on some of the discussion at that meeting and with staff, they did modify the design to what you see this evening. So there's more brick. There's more of a definition on the streetscape that staff believes is more consistent with the design standards for downtown. The Planning Commission held a public hearing June 24th, voted 4-0 to recommend approval. I didn't have a slide on parking, but let me mention parking real quick. With the reconfiguration of the parking, they're short, either 1 or 2 parking spaces. And it depends on how much residential and how much commercial is on that second floor of the Fisher building. So, and everything that's on the PUD is an estimate. We verify at the time of building permit because the excluded spaces can change when you do the actual tenant finish. But based on current estimates, they would need either 1 or 2 parking spaces beyond what they're providing. So they're proposing to pay use the city's fee and lieu program to pay out either 1 or 2 or however many are determined at the time of building permit. The residential uses also require guest parking. Those can be provided on street if there is on-street parking within the development. Staff supportive of their proposal to count the on-street parking as their 1 required guest space. With the reconfiguration of Front Street, they are gaining 2 additional on-street parking spaces. So with that, staff is recommending approval of Resolution 46, Series 2021, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sorry about that. I have 2 mouses or mice on my desk here. Any council members have questions for Director Zucchero? Councilmember Fahey.
Yes, thank you. My question is, it appears that the units in the second floor of the existing building will all be rental units. They won't be for sale. Is that also true for the 3 new units, or will they be for sale? And how would they deal with our affordable housing or inclusionary housing efforts?
Mhm. Sure. So we typically don't regulate whether units are for sale or for lease. We can definitely ask the applicants if they have an intention. Developments like this can go through a condominium platting process that goes straight through the county, and we don't regulate condominium platting. So theoretically, they could, at any point in the future, if this is approved, condominium plats and then sell the units through a condominium plat in the future rather than just lease the spaces. So I defer to the applicant if they have an intention on which way they're going with that. And then,
Thank you.
what was your second question?
So sorry
Oh,
to
the
interject. So I
inclusionary.
just 1 second. So sorry to interrupt, Rob. So we'll just wait until the applicant presentation on that portion of it, and then Director Zakuro will answer the second question.
Yeah, so the inclusionary housing, so our inclusionary housing goes into effect 30 days after your second reading. So that date is not, and any application that came in before that date for a planned unit development does not have to meet the standard. It's only any PUD or final plat that comes in after the effective date, which is later in July. So this project came in before the effective date. It's not subject to the inclusionary requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Fahey. Director Zakuro, I have a couple of questions for you this evening. So with respect to the framework plan, we've added residential units before, and we've always talked about them being subordinate or a secondary use in downtown. So like we've seen where there's a shop in the front and then a home gets built kind of behind it in the back to the alley, or we've seen places where there's main floor retail and then a second story with residential. So we've seen a lot of that. And this has a component of that along Spruce Street where there's the main floor retail and then the second story. So just focusing on that portion for a second, is there anything in this that would allow the main story to not be commercial through this process? Or would this still require that main story of the existing building be commercial?
So yes, so under this proposal, the first floor of the Fisher Building would have to remain commercial. There is no request to that could be converted to residential use. So that would always have to be maintained as commercial unless they came back for a new request.
Thank you. And then on the second floor of that building, you talked about these 5 residential flex spaces, which seems like a unique opportunity and interesting. And I just wonder from a technical standpoint on staff's perception. So and talking about them going back and forth. So like we have development impact fees, for example, based on the number of bedrooms in a home. So what is your proposal and how we'll assess like things like water tap fees, impact fees, and do we need to document that today or not? And how will we account for and then charge for those impacts? Because the different uses have different impacts, and that's why we assess different impact fees and different tap fees.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think typically once you've paid a impact fee, then you would have met your obligation. So I would suggest that if they can convert to a residential use on the second floor, they would have to pay residential impact fees because you're adding a new residence to the city. I think they've met whatever commercial obligation since they're not expanding square footage. So I'd say once they've paid an initial residential, if they convert back to commercial, I would argue they've already paid a commercial fee when they originally developed. If they then go back to residential for a second time, I think they would have met their residential obligation. So I think that's how we would address it. It's a really great question as far as how would we track that from a staffing standpoint? We do have, pretty good software now where we can put in a lot of notes when building permits and PUDs are approved. So we could really try to just put a lot of information in the record when those building permits come through so that we could answer those questions when they come up in the future.
And similarly for the water side, like we could change, like for example, water billing on a commercial unit is different than water billing on a residential unit. So we could do a similar transfer and we would have 5 different meters and 5 different types of taps.
Yeah, and I don't know that I could speak with any authority on the water tap, but I would assume it would be similar to that. But I'd probably want to confirm with our Public Works Department on exactly how they would address that. So I don't know for sure.
Okay, and I want to just sort of make a comment also just that on the water tap piece, there was some opining in some of the notes from the application around the water taps. And I guess I would just say that we should leave it to the normal water tap assessment process, that nothing in the application would change our normal water tap process, regardless of what was written in letters and things like that to this point, that they would be assessed through the existing processes that are on the books.
Yes, that is an administrative process separate from PUD SRU requests.
Just making sure. And so then going back to sort of my first question and building on it. So in the beginning, we talked about how the primary use is still the commercial on the main floor, secondary residential. I totally see how that fits with the framework plan. But then you have these lots 2 and 3 that are fronting to Spruce. And so I'm having a hard time understanding the interpretation that these new units would then be predominantly commercial with no commercial component in them whatsoever. And so can you just explain it a little bit and let me just hear me out a tiny bit more. So what would keep, so I totally understand we don't want parking lots facing the main street. That seems to be the predominant comment in the meeting minutes from planning commissioners and things like that. And so we want to encourage the redevelopment of this section. So what would, in the future, what would prevent a different person, say fronting Main Street, from acquiring several properties in a row, platting them together, and then making them all row homes?
Yeah. So I think it is unique to have ground floor residential in downtown. I don't think we would want a lot of those. We certainly wouldn't want a predominance of those in any area or in any block. Preference would probably be to have ground floor commercial with upstairs residential, but I don't know that we have a policy that explicitly says that within a single building, it has to be that way. But I think predominantly for all of the core area, you would want to have predominantly commercial development. But there could, again, I'm just not aware of any specific policies in the framework plan or the design standards that would require that. But I think if we did have, we take these on a case-by-case basis also, and that's why having them as an SRU is maybe a good way to continue to do it, because you can look at the context of the block, what else is there, and make a determination that it may or may not be okay to have ground floor residential in some limited area of downtown.
So I guess if I'm asking, do we need some kind of document? So in this case, there's still a primary commercial component in the Spruce facing section of the development. And so do we need to do anything to make it clear that the predominant use has to be commercial as is explained in the framework plan, and that this is a unique circumstance with the corner lot that would allow for this ground floor commercial, or ground floor residential? Or would it be better to just require ground floor commercial as was intended? So that, I mean, if you look at the places in, like, say, the urban renewal area where we have ground floor residential, the windows are drawn, it's not an active streetscape, it's, closed curtains. So would it be better if the intent is to have ground floor commercial to make it explicitly required and say that the residential can be second floor or behind it? Or I'm just trying to understand how to document that this is a unique circumstance, or if it's not a unique circumstance, how do we preclude every single unit in downtown from turning into a row home?
Sure. So I think there's some uniqueness to the development in that, there's only so much area within that gap in the parking area for those 3 residential row homes. So, and then if we want to try to preserve a parking lot back there, there is some limit to, probably having ground floor commercial and then having a viable upstairs residential product. I say, and there is a wide range of residential products, where you can have micro units, you don't have to have this, but this is what the applicant wants to propose. I think there's a market they're trying to fit into, and I'd probably defer to the applicant because I don't know, I can't say with confidence that you couldn't do a smaller residential unit up top. Certainly the way they've designed it, it's not designed currently to be commercial on the ground floor. So it would take a complete redesign at the very least, and I'm not sure about the marketability, they could speak to that. But so there is some limited area that may constrain that development. I think if City Council wanted to ensure a predominance of commercial development, that could be a condition on the Fisher Building maybe, where there's a finding maybe within the resolution or a condition potentially that they don't convert the ground floor of the Fisher Building to residential under the current development scenario. So that might be something you consider as well.
Thank you for that. And just my very last question is on the varied heights in downtown and how we get that over time with redevelopment. And so I wonder if there was any discussion about stepping down on the far south side of the building so that it's 2 stories on the far south unit, more in keeping with the adjacent building.
We didn't have any discussions with the applicant specifically on that. I think, the way we looked at that with the 3 row homes, we were trying to, I think, achieve a uniform facade. It is a relatively small area, as far as, but there are 1-story buildings immediately to the south. So there's a pretty stark transition to those buildings, I'd say, the 1-story to the south. But so we didn't recommend that they do that. I think was your question from the staff level, working with the applicant. We did not make that recommendation to them
My question was just, did you discuss it at all? Was that
or
talked about?
discuss it. We really didn't. I mean, we discussed how does this relate to those buildings, because it is quite a bit taller than those existing buildings to the south. But we didn't discuss stepping the building down further because of that.
Thank you for answering my questions this evening. Any other council questions? All right, seeing none, I think that takes us to our applicant presentation. Is there an applicant here tonight that would like to tell us about your project?
Yeah, there is. Let me get my video going. Yes, there we go. Good evening, Eric Hartrompt Associates. This is kind of an interesting project because it's also where my office resides, so it's close to home. And it's been interesting trying to work through all these issues with staff and with the owners of the building to try to come up with something that really is going to be unique and solve a lot of the issues that this property has dealt with over the years. There's currently vacant office space here. Would have happened without COVID, just because of the way the leases have turned over. But certainly, I can tell you that in my office, I need less space than I did previously. And I think that's becoming true of a lot of offices that have learned that when you need additional capacity, you don't really have to have a large office sitting there waiting to fill up and have all the facilities on site for your people, because it's very easy to get remote workers to fill in when you need that expansion space. So we don't all need that space that we've had in the past to sort of grow when the workload grows, and then have empty space when it recedes. So that sort of phenomena, I think, is playing out. Obviously not just in downtown Louisville, but everywhere. And so thinking about what that does to downtown when we do have less population from our offices. You notice it in the restaurants, even as they've bounced back. We don't have the same daytime population downtown that we used to have. And so one of the goals of this project really is to utilize mixed use as a way to kind of smooth out the peaks and valleys a little bit and have that life of on the street and in these buildings. And actually 24/7 life is better than just 9-to-5 life. So so I think it's an interesting project just from the aspect of how it's going to function downtown. And we see the Moffett Lofts over south of Moxie, very successful in terms of, I don't think there'd be any years where residential units in this building would ever be empty. I think they'll always be very full. So I do have a quick PowerPoint, if I can share my screen. We'll see if this works. Yeah, now I just find it. Oh, this is always fun. PowerPoint, where are you? There you are. So is everybody seeing my screen with the PowerPoint presentation?
It looks great. Yep, we can see it.
Great, thank you. So this is the project viewed from the patio at 740 Front Street. And as Rob indicated, the building on your right is the known as the Fisher Building, built by Gary Fisher, who was a contractor. I think he was second or third generation. His family built the Steinbach lumberyard, which would be just behind where I'm standing in this view, where the pavilion is part of that development as well. And the Fishers have been a Louisville family for generations, and Bart Fisher has a construction company up by Longmont now, but it's fun because I've worked with that family for years, and they do have quite a history in town. So this building does retain some history, and also as the library for a while, it has a civic history as well. So into the future, there will be lots of things that are attached to this building. The current site, as you're all aware, I'm sure, and Caleb looks at this every day, is a parking lot. And the the framework plan and the downtown guidelines really talk about how we don't want parking lots to face the street, because it really does interrupt our pedestrian environment downtown. And this is obviously an existing condition that existed when all those documents were actually written. But it's a good example of why that's not a good idea to put parking lots up against the street. Across the street, we have a variety of properties, and adjacent to this building, there is the what I believe was a residential, is now I believe mixed use. There's been residences in there as well as commercial uses in the building directly south of us here. It's been on the market. I'm not sure if it's sold or under contract or what, but it's possible that we could see some redevelopment of that site as it turns over. And then across the street, there's a variety of buildings from the somewhat historic building on the corner. It's been there, I think it was a turn of the century building originally on that corner that was added on to a building that was built in a traditional style, but a fairly new building. I think that was in the 90s, to renovations of the buildings to the north of that. Again, we've got a one-story building here that is adjacent to a 35-foot building right next to it. So that kind of development happens. There's the one-story building, and then I don't know if you can see my pointer, but this is a two-story building at 726 Front. And then right adjacent to that, again, another one-story building, which is the historic 740 Front building and the addition that sort of linked that area between the two buildings. And so, Mayor, kind of to your point, that rhythm on our downtown of buildings that rise, this building is essentially the same height as the building we've proposed, to a one-story building, a historic building to a new building. We have that very eclectic vernacular downtown. And so I think that really we're a lot smaller than this building at 726 Front. And I think it really does sort of follow some of the existing patterns that we already see directly in this neighborhood in downtown. Directly to the north of the Fisher Building is, of course, the library, which is a very active neighbor. It's a lot of pedestrian use, and most citizens visit there at one time or another. So this intersection, this part of town, really is very active, even though, frankly, you go south on Front Street and it feels pretty sleepy at times. So the existing building, the Spruce Street facade, really is not getting any major changes other than windows that would become operable, and then some small, what we call French balconies that would open up to the street here. And otherwise, it'll remain pretty much as is, facing to the north and to the east. On the west side of the building, on Via Artista, is a great mural that the Rudolphs commissioned to commemorate the fact that the building was a library. And so if you've all enjoyed that mural and caught the library references, as well as all of the memorable people who visited downtown, Dalai Lama and others, of course. The main changes are going to be on the south side of the building, where you can see there's one stair that comes up here. There'd be a larger balcony out here that would be sort of the entrance to that residential unit. And each of these residences would then have a sort of large balcony and then stair access from the south. The two units that flank the existing lobby would actually access from inside the stairs and elevator that are already there. And that's one reason we thought that giving some flexibility to those two spaces is appropriate, because they could function as a live-work kind of an arrangement. Somebody could have their commercial use or office in there as well as live there. It could be a small office, or it could all be residential. So that's the idea of having the flexibility for those two spaces that flank the lobby. The design drivers for this project really start with the marketability of the existing space in this building. And we believe that the residential use is going to be very well received in the marketplace, whereas the office space, frankly, has been more difficult to keep leased in this building and in some other buildings downtown. But obviously, as the mayor pointed out, the commercial uses on the storefront along Spruce are very important to downtown. That commercial use would remain. And then obviously improve the pedestrian experience by removing that parking lot facing Front Street. And the parking situation will be mostly accommodated on site as far as the parking demand. The other thing that happens as we add mixed use is we do get more efficiency of the existing spaces because we will have, I mean, if you go to our parking lot tonight, it's very empty except for my car. And so people who would be living here can occupy those spaces. And some of those people may commute to Boulder or Denver and leave those spaces open during the day. So frankly, I believe that we will have better efficiency than an all commercial building. And so I think that as downtown continues to evolve, I think that mixed use can actually be a benefit to our parking situation. So I think it's something to consider. The mixed use environment downtown is something that has always existed. You know, there were residences right alongside commercial buildings, the mom and pops. Some people lived in the building that their businesses were in as well. And so I think that the history of mixed use downtown has served downtown and Louisville well, and we think it's really important to continue it. And the framework plan recognizes that and encourages the investigation of mixed use where the zoning from the 70s, 80s basically zoned out residential uses downtown. And obviously we want the new building to respect downtown's historic buildings and to you know, be part of the context of downtown and really add to the eclectic nature that we have downtown. Obviously, complying with the design guidelines is a very important thing. This just shows you those orange areas would be that kind of flex space. Everything that's yellow would be residential on the second floor. And again, on these units here, we really wanted to create a storefront type environment with a separate entrance for these 3 units so that that main floor space hopefully can be utilized for somebody who needs a home office or doesn't have an office to go to, but you know, can work out of their home. You know, we use the term live work loosely, a lot of times describing what uses go on in a mixed use building. And in Louisville, we have a very defined definition of live work. So we can't really call these live work units because we don't have a large enough space on the main floor to accommodate the retail space that is required proportionally on a live work unit. So that's why we're sort of limited to what fits into home occupations for those units. But the way they're designed, they'll function much better for somebody who needs some kind of a little commercial storefront, home office, whatever, than they would as another bedroom. So our hope is that the people who are attracted to these units would have some kind of a use that would be interesting and enliven the streetscape as opposed to just closed blinds as we have seen in Delo on some of those units. Again, you know, our 36 feet is set back further than the building across the street, which is about 35 feet. And so we've, working with staff, really tried to emphasize that 2-story feeling of the facade with the brick going up to the second floor balconies and third floor balconies above the second floor. So I think that as far as the design guidelines go, that, you know, that articulation has really been accommodated here. There you can see it from the south, sort of the heavier base with elements of painted steel and brick and some wood to warm it up, as well as some horizontal siding and lath elements that you would find downtown in some of our older buildings. And so the painted steel and the brick sort of harkens to the library as well. So I think as far as context, I think it's trying to be a good neighbor downtown. And that's really my presentation, and happy to answer any questions. I think one of the questions that came up was rental versus for sale. And I think that Rob put it well, that really any residential unit can be condominiumized. And I don't think you regulate that, whether a unit is for sale or for rent. One thing that we are doing is we've got a commercial and a residential tap plan for the Fisher building, so that those units that may start out commercial and turn residential or vice versa, whatever may happen, in terms of that flexibility, we've got both taps accommodated, and then obviously the tap fees and everything would be paid at the time the residential use was put in place on the existing building. And of course, the new building will be residential taps from the get-go. So,
Thank you for the presentation, Eric, very much. Any questions from council members for the applicant this evening? All right, well, that takes us over. Oh, sorry about that. Councilmember Dickinson has a question.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for the presentation, Eric. I'm curious, if you guys put thought into, Rob talked a little bit, but the first story being actual retail commercial, and why that wasn't, some of you guys went with. I think that for me, that's the hardest part of this design, is that it is first floor residential there. I'm just wondering what the obstacles were in making that truly a live work, or truly a commercial space.
Well, I think the main obstacle is just the market. As we were planning this project, and today, there's vacant space on the first floor of this building. And if you go back through the years, that has been a common occurrence, and I'm not quite sure why. And again, you're familiar with the Front Street environment. We now have that one-story building has a tenant, but for the longest time after it was put in place, renovated, it sat empty, and there's still empty space on both ends of this building. And so I think that it's just a tough place. We only have so much sort of retail commercial energy that downtown can really support. And I think that history has proven that Front Street's been a tough place for the retail. You get off Main Street a block, it doesn't seem like much, but it really does make a difference. And so while everybody recognizes, the ownership, and obviously I recognize the first floor of this building facing Spruce Street is very important to remain as commercial. That the little bit of space, so this is about 7,000 square feet of commercial space facing Spruce Street. The little bit of space, because we do have parking to satisfy as well. And so when you look at those buildings on Front Street, about half of the first floor is taken up with parking. And so that front half represents a pretty small footprint that can be commercial. So then the choice would be to start eliminating parking and adding commercial space that then would just be very difficult to lease. And so makes it tough to make the project work. So we took the approach of somewhere in the middle, where if we try to encourage with the design of those first floor spaces, somebody's commercial use on those 3 units, then that's helpful. And that was sort of what we felt was our middle ground.
And is there any way, once they're built, if I'm a music teacher and I want to use the first floor, they are one space, right? They're not designed in any way to be able to go back to that, where one user might use the first floor for something small like that, a music teacher, massage therapist, or other therapists, what have you.
They're very much designed to be a separate use. There's a separate entrance, there's a storefront, and there's an ADA bathroom in that first floor space. And so it basically can lock off from the rest of the unit. So you have a residential unit that has its own entrance and its own life, from the garage upstairs to the main living level. And then you've got this space on the first floor, which I think would make a great home office, frankly, because people can visit you there easily. And it's set up to be more of a commercial space, ceiling height, the commercial bathroom, everything is set up, and that would remain. If somebody decided to use it as a spare bedroom or something, family room or whatever, then, they might utilize it that way, but it wouldn't change the configuration of the space and the fact that it can always be used for some small commercial use.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Thanks for that extra detail, Eric. That's very helpful. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I have a question for Director Zaccaro. Could you talk a bit about sort of the allowed uses in this first floor space on these 3 residential units? You talked about accountants or music teachers or whatever. If someone wanted to set up a very small shop, a very small like sales tax generating operation essentially. Is that an allowable use in this commercial space, or does it have to be some sort of a service like an accountant or real estate agent or something along those lines?
No, I don't think so. Let me get to that section of the code. Typically, the live work section. So the live work section has some specific restrictions on types of use.
Director Zaccaro, just before are you looking in the live work section or the home occupation section?
I'm sorry. Yes, I'm accidentally looking in the live work section. That's why I'm not finding it. Thank you. I had that pulled up, expecting some questions about that. So yeah, the home occupation section, I apologize, has some limitations on use. And I don't think that it limits selling products from the home explicitly. So I think that could be a possibility. And if you have any other questions, I can get, as I pull up the code just to confirm.
Okay, that would be helpful. I'm just trying to figure out it sounds like a really small little shop or space. And I agree with the applicant that it sounds like the way they're designing it, it sounds like it would be ideal for someone who was providing the personal service, if you will. But I'm just trying to figure out if, I think the thing that I'm struggling with is what Councilmember Dickinson and the mayor have already alluded to, which is the very nature of this area being sort of commercial on the first floor and residential potentially on the second floor, moving to an entirely residential space. So I'm just trying to figure out, are we limited to particular uses in this particular space?
Yeah, so the home occupations, so some of the limitations with home occupations are that if you are having classes, for example, maybe they're a dance class or an art class or a music class, I think you're limited to no more than 4 students. So if you're doing any type of instruction. And then things like, of course, auto repair, but dental offices, medical offices are not allowed. But you can, as I'm reading through it, I don't think there's a prohibition on selling of products, so a sales tax generating type product. One of the things with live work and, the reason we have different space requirements and trying to commit an actual usable space, I think, to live work. Also, when you do live work, formally through our code, you're required to have parking as well. So I think the intent is to have limited use so that it doesn't have a significant parking demand. There aren't those external impacts. But I think there's a list of prohibited uses rather than allowed uses within that home occupation. That's 171640 of the code. So I've kind of listed some of those that are prohibited. Again, medical offices, classes of more than 4 people. Massage therapy actually is an excluded use, but I know a typical home use. There's a lot of office uses, whether they're counselors or maybe attorneys or somebody in the in the financial profession providing tax services. Those are the types of things we see often in home occupations. I don't think we typically see sale, but there is no explicit prohibition that I'm aware of as I'm reading through it here.
Okay, thank you, Director.
Thank you, everyone. I don't see any other council questions at this time, so that will take us to our public comment portion on this agenda item. This will be the opportunity for the public to provide any comments for us on this agenda item. If you have any, please raise your hand at this time. All right, thank you. Seeing none, that takes us back over for council questions and comments. I just want to really thank everybody for their questions so far. The only comment I'll make is if we could add a finding, and I'm not sure how this will go with other council members as not everyone's weighed in, but if we could add a finding, something along the lines of the primary street facing uses remain predominantly commercial in this development between the ground floor Fisher building and the design of the small retail spaces in the residential units on front. So that satisfies the SRU requirement. Something along those lines, I think would help explain why this still meets our requirement to have predominantly commercial on the ground floor and have the residential units as an accessory or a secondary use. So if folks will noodle on that and see if that's acceptable. Councilmember Lipton? You're on mute.
Oh, I am. Thank you. I want to start my comments by
first suggesting a motion to approve Resolution 46, Series 2021, with the condition as just stated by the mayor.
Thank you. Is there a second? Mayor Pro Tem Maloney raised his hand in second, and I just, my intention, just as a friendly amendment, Councilmember Lipton, was just to add it as just another finding, not a condition of approval. Thank you.
Oh, you don't want it as a condition?
It's not a condition, it's just a in the findings, just so that if there's a future application that comes in, it explains why this is different than that. Like this is maintaining that ground floor retail, so it's just a finding.
No, that's fine. That's the best way to approach it.
I'm not sure it's the best way, but that was my intent.
Yeah, I agree with the intent. So generally, I've been, I guess, somewhat involved with this building since it was first built many, many years ago. And it's always been kind of I won't call it dysfunctional, but non-functioning space. It just wasn't really laid out well for the types of businesses that we seem to attract into the downtown area. And it's suffered from a lot of vacancy over the years. It really doesn't support our library and our civic core very well. And I think it's time for a change, and I would welcome a different concept. I think integrating some living units into this on the second floor, I think would actually invigorate perhaps the building and give it a new life, a new concept, and a new beginning. So I think this would certainly be an improvement over the current condition. I think it meets the market necessities to do the redevelopment. And I think it would overall benefit the downtown. So I'm going to be supportive of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate the questions from my council colleagues on clarifying. One of the concerns I had when I first looked at this was the 950 Spruce piece on the first floor staying commercial. With that, however we tactically do that tonight, I can't remember the words you used, Mayor, but however we do that, I'm very much supportive of this because I think the rest of it, I really do like the design. I like the fact with the residential on Front Street, moving the parking lot back, I think it's much more attractive, and I think it does help invigorate the downtown. So along with my colleague, Councilor Lipton, I'm going to be supporting this tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And so just turning over to Director Zucchero and or City Attorney Kelly, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney just raised whatever the best way is to add in our finding around the commercial. Are you satisfied we've done that acceptably through the motion as it's been presented, or would you like to suggest that we do that differently?
This is City Attorney Kelly, and I'm satisfied. We can get your exact language from the recording of the meeting and incorporate that.
Thank you, City Attorney Kelly. And so the next comment to speak to the motion is Councilmember Dickinson, or against.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it's interesting. I think for clarification, my office, Fox Property Management, is on Front Street at 726. So I do look out the front window onto this parking lot, which is what Eric Hartroff was alluding to. So I am familiar with the space, and I will say, as a pedestrian, that yeah, it's not a very well activated space, and it's not a good use, of that Front Street. And so I'm really excited about the concept of having something fill that gap and activate the space. And I'm excited about the design, and that it looks like retail on the first floor. And certainly the sign question, I'm in support of that piece of allowing for signage in what is a residential building, and really hope that those signs would exist because there would be businesses there. And so I'm really hopeful that the whole corner is activated by this and that it's a more vibrant space. I am surprised that an entirely residential, triplex, if you will, three units is being supported by council. I think I can go along with it. I'm a little surprised, and I'm trying to think about 2 years from now, looking at that building, not as the tenant across the street, but just in general, is like, was that a good choice? Because it's going to be here for 50 years, and if it's going to be residential for 50 years, is it awkward and weird to have a residential unit plop down in the middle of right in the middle of our core commercial space? And so I'm just conflicted personally. I'm really conflicted about allowing residential. I really like the idea of residential above, so I have no problem with residential at all. Like I think that is a great way to activate that space. I just really don't want it on the first floor. So I will probably acquiesce to support this. I'm not as thrilled as some of you might think I might be about this project, but I can go with the flow on it. If that's where council's leaning, and I think still not heard from a couple people, but that's where my conflicted space is. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Any other council comments or discussion? Questions? I'm just not trying to rush anybody. I see some people maybe reaching for their mice. And if there are no other questions or comments, Councilmember Lay.
I think some concerns similar to the ones that Councilmember Dickinson raised, I think they are to an extent addressed by the finding that the mayor has proposed. So, you know, it certainly will be delightful to see something other than that rather ugly parking lot in that space. But that's, alas, not really the main thrust of all of this. I think I can probably support it as well. And in part, I guess I'm convinced, you know, we sometimes think of the market as being so variable. And I am somewhat persuaded by the comment that Mr. Hartrop mentioned about at least his view that that's what's that the market is what's partly informing his proposal here. That flexibility is necessary for that. So I'll support it, not as enthusiastically. It would be really wonderful to have straight commercial in there, but I think we've got enough guardrails in there. So thanks.
Councilmember Fahey.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'm also in favor of the recommendation to try to maintain retail or commercial on first floor. But I understand that the trend now is for a lot more live work situations, and those 3 units would really lend themselves to a live work situation. The examples that have been given for, you know, a music teacher or an accountant or something are really good examples. And there are just a lot of people who don't want to go back to a big office building, but work remotely. And so I will be in support of this project. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember Fahey, and I'll just add my support to the motion. So I think the pieces, the additional finding, just explaining that the way the applicant has shown us that those main floor units and the residential units are actually a separate entrance with a separate bathroom, and they're designed to be a retail unit. It's just that our code doesn't allow for them to be called lived work units because of some other requirements around live work units. So they really are designed as commercial units, and the main floor facing Spruce Street within the same development is maintaining commercial. So I think we've seen that. I also found G1, G4, G9, G10, G11, G20, G13, and a number of the other criteria to be, you know, more than met. The use of materials is very consistent and very good with the surrounding area. I think the community will be happy with the choices in material selection. I thank the applicant for that and for ensuring that plantings are appropriate, that the lighting's appropriate. You know, I asked some questions around the stepping down, and I think we're going to be faced with some tough choices to be made when somebody's development comes in, because the city council is charged with this decision-making point where we have to decide how to maintain varied building heights, and that responsibility has been given to the city council. So to do that, at some point, it means someone will not be able to build their 3-story building, because otherwise we won't have varied heights. And so within the context that's been shown here, I can understand it. I think it might have been a good idea to step down the south end, but I'm not proposing it as a requirement. But at some point, city council will be forced into a really hard decision in order to maintain those varied building heights. And so someone is going to come in someday with a 3-story building and say they want it, and we'll have to say no in order to maintain varied building heights. Otherwise, we'll just have 3-story buildings. So it's just something to flag and to think about, and like, how do we decide where the appropriate places are to maintain varied building heights? It's going to be a real challenge, but I thank the applicant for coming forward. I thank the members of the public for providing letters to the Planning Commission and to the council. That helps tremendously in making decisions. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I have one more question for Director Zaccaro. In I'm not sure what we call them, live work units. That's not the right term. Whatever we're calling them.
Home occupation.
In this particular part of the code. Thank you. Home occupation. It is not permissible, I assume, for if those units were to be condominiumized, for the owner of that condominium, that home occupation unit, to then rent out or lease that first floor space to a commercial entity. Is that correct, or would that be permissible?
No, right, yeah, you have to reside in the building where your home occupation is taking place, both for home occupation and a live work. If they did, ever convert to live work and meet all of our standards and requirements, you have to live there as well.
Okay, so the only people who are allowed to conduct commercial business there would be the people who live in the unit. Okay,
correct.
Thank you.
Any other comments from council members? All right, thank you, everyone. With that, I'll close the public hearing, and I'll ask for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Lay,
Yes.
Councilmember Lipton,
Yes.
Councilmember Dickinson,
Yes.
Mayor Stolzman,
Yes.
Councilmember Fahey,
Yes.
Councilmember Brown,
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. The motion carries. It takes us to our next agenda item this evening, which is Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Task Force update. I'm going to turn it over to Emily and to Anthony for a presentation. They've joined us this evening, and we can't thank you enough for joining us. Oh, it looks like Deputy City Manager Davis has turned her camera on. So if you were going to introduce the item, I will turn it over to our Deputy City Manager, Megan Davis.
No, it's no problem. I was just going to turn it over. I'm glad to see Anthony and Emily are both here with us, and I'm just going to run the slides for them. So why don't you go ahead and kick it off? Thank you.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Mayor Stolzman and members of council. It's nice to see you all. Thank you for your service to the Louisville community and for giving us a bit of a platform this evening to give you an update on the important work of the Louisville EDI Task Force. Once we get this started, we'll take you straight through. All right, very good. Thank you, Megan and Meredith. So we'll go ahead to the first slide. So there are a couple of things we'll cover just for those members in the Louisville community who have not yet met Emily and I. We'll give you just a quick introduction, and then we will recap what the task force objectives are that you as a city council have set for the community, introduce the EDI task force members, and then provide a recap of the first two meetings that we've held in May and June, as well as what's on the horizon for focus groups to really engage critical voices in your community. Next slide. So again, my name is Anthony Graves. I serve as the principal of Graves Civic Solutions. And Emily?
Hi, everyone. My name is Emily Shamsuddin. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the principal and owner of ESD Consulting.
Thank you, Emily. So based on your leadership, right, in the conversations that you were having in the community, you've really been quite responsive to the needs, right, of diverse communities and trying to figure out what vision you'd like to achieve for those who are living in your community. And so you've really pulled together a requirement to seat an EDI task force, and their responsibility is as follows: to provide advisory recommendations to Louisville City Council with respect to community issues affecting Black, Indigenous, and people of color, and other marginalized communities. Next slide. So as you're well aware, we had a really rich response to the call for applicants for the EDI task force. As your fellow council members will tell you, it was pretty tough to go from 55 amazing applicants to this high-powered team of 11 who are volunteering their time. So we'd like to publicly thank and acknowledge task force members Stephanie Barr, Nancy Cummins, Unique Duke, Francisco Estevez, Jojo Fulmar, Grace Gee, Haslina Hashim, Devanand Hines, Ronald Reeves, and Leanne Terada, as well as Lou Yu. Next slide. Emily, would you like to talk about the first meeting?
Absolutely. So we had our first task force meeting on May 20th. It was on the heels of quite a bit of preparation work to make sure that we had everything that we needed and everything that we thought the task force needed to be able to fully participate. And so a couple of things I just want to make note about. One was we prepared a rather large onboarding packet for everyone in order to prepare for that first meeting, which included a wide variety of materials, which I will not run through all the documents, but everything from information about the city to shared DEI language, the agenda, of course, information about accommodations and accessibility needs and requests that folks could make. So it was a very comprehensive packet. And then during that first meeting, what we really wanted to do was set the stage, right? So this was the first time that task force members were going to be meeting each other, and the first time that we were going to be able to really have everybody in the same space. And so we spent a lot of time making sure that we were setting the stage appropriately. And so all of the task force meetings from here on out, we'll include these notes, which you see here on the slide, but wanting to just make note of this, which is that the city has helped us to secure ASL and Spanish language interpretation services for all of the meetings. And so a part of the opening of all meetings is a recognition of those services, but also a language justice statement that the interpreter helps to give. We also spend some time and do a land acknowledgement as part of each meeting. We review and make sure that folks are updating their names with their pronouns, and we talk a little bit about why that's something that's important, how that helps to cultivate an inclusive space. And so those are some of the things that we will do at every meeting subsequent here. But really this first meeting was an orientation. And so we reviewed the task force objectives that Anthony just reviewed with you all here. We had a full house, which was really lovely. So in addition to all of the task force members, we were really lucky that we also had the city clerk Meredith, who, by the way, has been a logistics wizard for us and has been wonderful. We also were joined by Deputy City Manager Megan Davis, as you know, and then also we had Kathleen Kelly, the Louisville City Attorney, who was able to go over the Colorado Open Records Act protocols to make sure that task force members were very clear about sort of the rules that govern their participation. And so a lot of this first meeting was just that, right? Being clear about the objectives and what we're trying to achieve, being clear about the rules that govern them. And then in addition to that, we really wanted to also make sure that we as a team, if you will, are holding space together in a way that really is going to advance diversity, equity, inclusion. And so we spent time reviewing group agreements as well as the concept and a beautiful poem around brave space, with the expectation that everyone who is a part of the task force will do just that, hold each other accountable to those agreements and hold space for each other. And then we also reviewed, of course, the accommodations that were provided by the city, which again, kudos to the city for the work that you all did to help secure all of those accommodations to make sure that folks really did have what they needed to participate. So after we kind of got through all of this orientation, which was very important and is very important, the big first thing that we tackled as a group was really talking about those focus groups and beginning to discuss what topics the focus groups should explore. So I'm actually going to leave that for Anthony to discuss. We were also joined, I just want to point out as well, by council members Kyle Brown and Chris Lay. Thank you again for being at that first meeting. And again, and having the mayor, I don't know if I said that, but the mayor was also there as well, which was really great to just reiterate the commitment that you all have to this work. And I do think that it went a very long way to the task force members. So I will let Anthony bridge us into that second meeting.
Thank you, Emily. Just one other quick note there. So Mayor Stoltzman, thank you for really setting the tone during that meeting and really reaffirming the commitment of the entire city government to this process. I think that really was meaningful to all members of the EDI task force and the members of the Louisville community who are watching. I'd also like to acknowledge, I believe, Councilor Dickinson, who I think was there as well, perhaps with his wife, who asked some really excellent questions there at the end of our first session during public comment. So thank you all for showing your full support. Very good. On to the second EDI meeting. So we continued to build on our momentum from the first meeting and really had each of the task force members do some homework as well, right? And not only had a discussion during that first task force meeting, but had them follow up with their thoughts around the focus group areas and giving us additional feedback for things we might consider when beginning to frame future discussions with the public. And so once we collected all that information from them during the first task force meeting and reviewed all of the content they emailed to us subsequently, we organized that content and reflected back to the task force members of the second meeting exactly what the consensus was regarding the focus group topics that they wanted to undertake. And so the 5 areas that the EDI task force has asked us now to dive into for public discussion for 5 focus groups are as follows: safe and welcoming environment, public accommodation or access to city services, youth engagement to advance racial equity and social justice, housing, and public health. And they were very clear as well that each of these areas should have a byline to really look at language justice, right? To really acknowledge the diversity of this community. It's also a nod to the largest minority group in Louisville, which is the Latinx community. And so we're really going to be quite intentional in thinking through that. In addition to green lighting these 5 focus groups that they want us to explore in the community, we also took some time to brainstorm a list of organizations and then offline individuals who might be interested in participating in the focus groups. And so, you have organizations that have been suggested like the United Way, right, and local educational institutions, nonprofits, et cetera. I also wanted to take this time, and I failed to put this in our slides, so forgive me, but I just wanted to invite the public, if you are interested in participating in these focus groups, understanding that we have thresholds, and I'll explain those briefly. We want to have intimate conversations where we're really getting substantive feedback from a small group of individuals, between 5 and 10 people per focus group. And we want to make sure as well that we have BIPOC participation, right? The mandate that this city council set was to really better understand the experience of Black, Indigenous, and people of color in the Louisville community. And so, of course, it stands to reason that we want to make sure that there's heavy representation in these focus groups from those communities whose experience we're trying to gauge. Let's go to the next slide. And I'm sorry, I forgot to say this. And we'll post this in the chat. We've set up an email box, which is gravescivicsolutions@gmail.com. And so we'll post that before the end of our presentation in the event that any member of the community who may be interested in participating in these focus groups, if there's slots available, because we're capping at 10 per focus group, especially if you are connected to or a part of communities of color. We'd love to hear from you.
And Anthony, sorry
Yes.
to interject here, just we don't use the chat at our meetings. And so if
Oh,
you'll
very
just
good.
if you'll say it again slowly, just to give people a chance, and we'll be sure to include it in the meeting minutes as well. If you'll just
Thank
repeat
you.
the-
Mayor Stoltzman, always finding great opportunities to coach me and lead me to success. Thank you so much for that. So actually, if you look at the icon in the top left corner for Graves Civic Solutions, it's just all that in one word, gravescivicsolutions@gmail.com. There in the top left corner. Thank you, Mayor. So we want to give you a little more detail regarding the types of themes that may emerge in the 5 focus groups that the EDI task force has designated as priority areas for public engagement. So under the category public accommodation or access to city services, really we're trying to think about how the core functions of the Louisville city government are connecting to members of your community. Do they feel available? Are they accessible to communities of color? Are there barriers to entry that we're not aware of, right? Or systemic barriers that we need to remedy through council action or programmatic changes? And so some of the bullets here include things like how are BIPOC community members treated, through city services and how they're being engaged by the Louisville city government. Are there barriers that may just be perception that are closing doors to serving diverse communities? What does physical access look like? I think it's very important to remind you all that we are very focused on communities of color based on the mandate that you set. But really, this is also an intersectional task force. And so are there accessibility issues, like physical accessibility issues for people with disabilities? Are there other things that create barriers like wayfinding right in and around the building, or language access issues that could be prohibitive to diverse communities? Transportation, information awareness. How are you distributing information? How is it getting out to key communities across all neighborhoods in Louisville? Hours of operation, are they really reflective of people with diverse work needs, right, with childcare or other issues? Neighborhood access, do people feel that they have access to all neighborhoods and they're treated equitably no matter where they go when seeking city services? And is there any service level disparity based on neighborhood or potentially income level, et cetera? Next slide. Safe and welcoming environment. I know we can all appreciate this, right? No matter who we are, whatever our lived experience, we all want to feel welcome and safe in the environments where we live, work, and play. And so we really want to hear from BIPOC and other community members around whether they feel that the environment is really giving them that vibe, if you will, right? Sometimes it's an intangible, but there are ordinarily things that send those signals. And so sometimes it's symbols. Just to digress a second, I recently held a focus group with another client where we were looking in depth at the needs of the LGBTQIA+ community. And during those focus groups, they really talked about the importance of the pride flag or the transgender flag in key communities, right? To demonstrate that it's a welcoming community. And so that's just one example that we might look at as we're thinking about diverse communities and how we engage them with wayfinding symbols and signals. We'd like to hear from the public. Overall environment, how does it feel in a space and what are the factors contributing to that feeling? How are staff trained to engage people from various lived experiences? Welcoming neighborhoods is pretty self-explanatory, and also the importance of law enforcement and how law enforcement engages with diverse communities. Next slide. Youth engagement regarding equity and social justice. This was a very popular topic among the EDI task force members. We recognize that when we are working towards race and social justice, there's a long arc, right, in American history and the evolution of our values and laws that have shaped our society, and sometimes the biases and structural barriers to equity. And so many people recognize that our youth may be the best and brightest pathway to long-term change in that regard. And so these focus groups will really be focused on how we can empower youth in the Louisville community to be active and have a voice and shape the future and really drive equity when it comes to the future possibilities in Louisville. So it also may engage youth-centered activities around EDI. Next slide. Housing. So we know that, Colorado overall is a hot market, and the metro area is caught in a housing crisis. There's a crunch for affordable housing. Even post-pandemic, the values of the homes where we live are on the rise. And so what does that mean when there's economic inequity that is tied to racial inequities, right? And so there will be a number of questions regarding housing accessibility for BIPOC communities. Does that feel equitable in the Louisville community? Are there barriers, visible or invisible, that may be prohibitive to home ownership for diverse communities? And so the sub-themes are certainly affordability, location, or the quality of housing, right, across various neighborhoods, information access regarding housing programs and partnership agreements. Zoning, it will really be interesting. Every community goes through an evolution as it pertains to zoning, right, and how they organize their municipality. And so those have impacts to housing availability, and that will be an interesting discussion potentially through this focus group. And then finally, are there other programs like rental assistance and homebuyer programs where that information is accessible? Next slide. Public health. So we all recognize that health equity is hardwired to the built environment, right? And so as you are voting on how you're shaping the city, and you are making decisions regarding urban planning, right, where open space is, where different amenities will go, all of these will have implications for public health and for various communities. And so we really want to look at healthy food access and open space, culturally approachable recreation, other opportunities. There will be a myriad of other things that can directly impact public health and speak directly to health equity for diverse communities who are living around Louisville. Next slide. And so finally, as we said, language justice should be a through line. As we are talking with people in the focus groups, we really want to hear from the public about how we can enhance accessibility in all forums for all touch points in Louisville city government through language access, whatever your language. Now, we recognize that Spanish language will be very important for Louisville's current and future trajectory, but we'd like to understand from the public how language should play a role in this community. So it may manifest in materials, websites, or public communications. It could be in wayfinding or translation services like we have pretty standard on these calls, or ASL. And so that concludes an overview of the different segments for the focus groups. Emily, shall I go back to you for next steps? Next slide, please.
Thanks, Anthony. So, excuse me. So right now we are in the process and have been of recruitment for those focus groups, as Anthony has mentioned. So both reaching out to individuals who have been recommended or referred, and then of course to local organizations as well. And so through that, we have compiled, I think, a pretty impressive and comprehensive list of individuals and organizations to consider for focus group participation. So the plan right now is Anthony and I will be facilitating those 5 focus groups between basically now-ish and August. During those focus groups, of course, we'll have someone who is able to take good notes, and we will be providing a report and a summary after each of the focus groups. And then once all of the focus groups are done, a part of the charge that we have is to provide then a comprehensive report back to the task force members. Once the task force members receive that report and all of the summaries and information from the focus groups, which again, we hope to happen sometime between August and September, then they're really going to take, and that's a huge charge obviously of the task force, is to take all of that information, all of that feedback and input, and to start making some decisions and to summarize what they think are going to be the best recommendations to move forward to you all for City Council in November of this year. So that is sort of the next steps. Again, we've already composed the list. Focus groups actually start this week. We'll provide those summaries. And then of course, the task force has their work ahead to really figure out what does all of that information really mean and what recommendations they want to put forth to you all.
Emily, if I might add just one quick thing before we go back to you, Mayor Stolzman, for any questions that you and the council may have. We really have a responsibility as well while we're listening to the public through these focus groups to kind of figure out what the themes are. And then we'll have the crosstabs, if you will, for the EDI task force to look at those details and see which themes are most important, right? To prioritize those themes, to take the top 4 or 5 issues back to you as a council to say, hey, we think this is like the low-hanging fruit or the greatest need in the community where council should really apply, legislative action or allocate resources to make a difference and move the ball forward.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to
Go
interrupt.
right ahead. That's it.
Thank you, Anthony and Emily. That was a fantastic presentation. And really, we can't thank you enough for all your hard work to this point so far. And I just want to thank all of the task force members as well. They've put in time and energy and effort to this point, and we're going to see the fruits of that going forward. Getting all of this input is the first step in our ability to be able to make change going forward. So first, the members of the public that have come tonight will have an opportunity to weigh in on this topic. So if any members of the public would like to testify on our Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Task Force update, please raise your hand now. And you can find the icon at the bottom of your screen. All right, seeing no one, that takes us back over to council members for questions and comments. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I appreciate all the work that Anthony and Emily and Megan, or Deputy City Manager Davis, our entire staff have put in. It's really exciting to see this going forward and coming together. And I just wanted to, say how interested I am in what the task force has to say, the recommendations that will come out of it. I think the topics that they have identified are already very interesting already. Things that we might have anticipated, things like housing and the accessibility and affordability of it, but also things that I wasn't necessarily anticipating, such as public health, which is particularly interesting, and all the more reason that this will be a very valuable group and set of recommendations for us. So thanks again for your work in facilitating this, and really appreciate everyone who is participating. And all the members of the community that are going to be members of the focus groups going forward, because those voices will be incredibly important in shaping these recommendations. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Councilmember Fahey.
Oh, thank you, Mayor. Yes, I will add my thanks to everyone that's been involved in this so far. I think this whole presentation was wonderful. What you've already accomplished is amazing to me. I'm particularly happy to see that you're involving the youth. I think they're the future of our country, and so they need to have a say. I would like to make one suggestion, actually 2 suggestions. The first one would be to also include older Americans. I think we have, being one myself, we have a lot of experience with things that worked and things that didn't work. And so we could perhaps help guide the process and move it along a little quicker. And the other comment that I have is something that I heard from a resident, a friend of mine, and that's that the question of announcing your pronouns is good for most people, but some people are uncomfortable declaring what their pronoun is, where they are on that gender spectrum. So maybe encourage, but not require. So otherwise, I think you're doing a wonderful job, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Fahey. If I might just respond quickly, Mayor Stoltzman.
Thank you very much, Anthony, please.
So just very quickly, Councilmember Fahey, thank you. That is excellent advice. We were very intentional in curating the EDI task force itself with your colleagues to think through senior representation because we think it's critically important. And so we think we've achieved that on the EDI task force, and we think that those voices are invaluable as well in the community and hope to have representation through the focus groups. So thank you for that reminder about the critical role that seniors play in our community. And then thank you for the recommendation regarding pronouns as well. The thing about race and social justice and advancing equity is it's a journey that you make together, right? And it's a dialogue for active participants. And so thank you for raising that voice this evening.
Thank you for that. And next council member with comments is Councilmember Lay.
Hi, Anthony and Emily, thank you very much for all your great work. I can see it bearing fruit already. And I appreciate the staff support that you're getting, and it's nice to hear. We know how great Meredith is, but it's nice to give her a shout out as often as we can, because she's invaluable to that. But I appreciate what you presented tonight. There was one question I just had, and it was, I don't want to get too deep into the substance of it because you haven't gotten any recommendations, or you're not close to those yet, but I was interested on the public health one. about healthy food access, actually. And I wondered if you could say a little bit. I think I have some idea about that, but I don't in our own community. I may not be very sensitive to that. So if there's a brief way to say something about that, I'd sure appreciate it.
Certainly, I'll dive right in. And Emily, I invite you as well to come in right after me if you have thoughts. So often when it comes to the location of diverse communities in urban centers across the country, oftentimes socioeconomic status and housing availability go hand in hand. And many times, if you have diverse communities that are in lower income areas with fewer amenities, right, reduced infrastructure, you have fewer grocery stores or farmers markets, right, or access to fresh fruit and vegetables that will directly impact public health, life expectancy. And so those are the types of issues that you might see with access to healthy food. Emily, is there anything that you would add?
I think the only thing, a part of why I think this topic is of particular importance is obviously because of the tremendous amount of intersection, right, that is present when you talk about public health. And we really think about those social determinants of health, right? It really goes beyond just healthcare. It goes even beyond just access sometimes to food. And so my hope is that through those conversations, it will actually help to garner even a wider lens around some of the issues around access and those other social determinants of health as well that might exist in a community.
May I just add one other? I apologize, Mayor, go right ahead.
No, please, Anthony, please add. I was just going to ask Councilmember Lay if that answered his question. So we'll go back to you, Councilmember Lay, after that.
So just one quick note, Councilmember Lay. The other thing that's important to note is the presence of fresh fruits and vegetables, of healthy food access. It's not just about the physical location of that amenity. It's also about the infrastructure that gives you access to that amenity. You might have, a grocery store or fresh food outlet that is close to many of the diverse populations in Louisville, as an example, but perhaps there are no sidewalks or accessible roadways that really take people there conveniently, which creates barriers to public health. And so it's really the whole package of both the presence of healthy food and the physical infrastructure to facilitate access.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. That does answer my question.
Thank you, Councilmember Lay, and that takes us to Councilmember Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Emily. It's been really wonderful to watch the two of you work. And I just want to, again, commenting on the process. And I think that the task force is fantastic, but that it doesn't end there, that group of people isn't meant to be the representation, but rather help facilitate more in-depth conversations with these focus groups. And it's really exciting and really exciting to hear what comes of all of that. And then, and then when this conversation becomes harder. Right now, it's a very easy conversation, but I'm looking forward to November and beyond when the conversation is much harder, because we actually might have to make some changes. So thank you for all your work. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you, Councilmember Dickinson. And so just once again, really want to thank both Anthony and Emily for all their work to this point. And please, if there are task force members watching and on, thank you all. And if there aren't, if you will please take our thanks back to them for the work so far. And we look forward to finding out more about these topics that have been identified in the months to come, so that we know how to move forward. So thank you so very much. And so with that, we will take a 5-minute break before our next agenda item. So the time is 8:08. And so we will be back in 5 minutes to start our next agenda item, which is our discussion on the cost of doing business scorecard. So see you in 5 minutes. The time is now 8:13, and when we get a quorum back on screen, we'll get started again.
Mayor's my mic working?
Yes, it is.
Great, thanks.
Thank you. All right, we have a quorum, and I expect we will have full attendance in just a couple of seconds, so we can go ahead and get started to introduce the next agenda item, which is the discussion and direction on our cost of doing business scorecard. We're going to have a staff presentation this evening from our Economic Vitality Director, Megan Pierce, who's going to take us through this topic. And Megan, if you'd like to take it away, please do.
Thank you again. So tonight we're talking about the cost of doing business scorecard. This is from our Economic Vitality Strategic Plan and is also incorporated in City Council's 2021 work plan. Tonight, Kim Bauer, who's the city's historic preservation planner, is actually going to be doing the presentation for you. Kim has been working with Economic Vitality part-time over the last several months, and she's been a huge help and joy to work with in terms of interacting with businesses. So she did the majority of the work here with data collection and interacting with the community. So she'll lead you in the presentation, and then we'll both be available to answer questions at the end.
Thank you very much. Kim, please take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to go ahead and share my screen here. And it looks like it did share. Can everyone see it okay? Excellent. Thank you so much. So good evening, Mayor Pro Tem, and members of Council. My name is Kim Bauer, and I'll be presenting the update on the cost of doing business scorecard for you this evening. For a little bit of background, the impetus for reviewing the city's fees and costs associated, as Megan just mentioned briefly there, for the development this evening came out of a council discussion on tap fees from November of 2019 in anticipation of some rate increases coming in 2020. This is also part of the city's Economic Vitality Strategic Plan, which includes a Q2 2021 supporting action to create and review a cost of doing business development scorecard to better understand the cost of doing business in Louisville. The scope for the current scorecard targeted 6 other communities for research and reference, including Broomfield, Boulder, Erie, Lafayette, Longmont, and Superior. Staff then surveyed the fees listed before you from those 6 communities: water tap fees, sewer tap fees, wastewater fees, stormwater fees, non-residential impact fees, and parking improvement fees. Comparing their non-residential fees, so tonight we'll focus on the non-residential. Data was researched in a number of ways, including fees that were online web pages or resources, fees that were included in a community's code or ordinances, and then also by following up with the communities themselves. A full set of data is included with the packet as attachment 1, but we'll be reviewing some of the scorecard graph data tonight. In this and the 2 following slides, we'll be presenting some of the data we have found visually. And the first 2 data sets before you are water tap fees at the 1-inch and 4-inch taps. As you will see here and in the other graphs following, the fees delineated are the highest fee, the lowest fee, and then Louisville's fee, which is sometimes the same, but sometimes different. So we included those for your reference. In addition, the footnote below each of the graph details which communities had data included in that particular graph. Each community did not necessarily have similar data to compare, so they will be listed only where applicable in that footnote. As mentioned here before you are the water tap fees at the 1-inch and 4-inch taps, and staff sought to showcase the general scorecard for the 1-inch or the smaller, maybe smaller commercial user versus the 4-inch, or that would be maybe a larger, more water intensive user for the numbers before you. You will also note in the footnote that Erie, Lafayette, and Superior with Louisville have data at both sizes listed on the graphs in the screen, while Boulder and Longmont are not listed in the footnote for the 4-inch, and this is because those 2 communities negotiate all tap fees at the 4-inch size and larger. This slide includes the sewer and stormwater fee data. The sewer tap fees are shown at the 1-inch tap size. Louisville's fee is above the lowest fee found in Superior, but well below a 1-inch tap fee in Boulder. Stormwater fees varied between communities, making it difficult to directly compare as some measured per acre versus per square foot, or their methodology differed and they have a stormwater permit fee rather than a stormwater tap fee. Typically, a stormwater tap fee is designated to offset the cost of capital infrastructure, and thus those communities make up the data included here, which is Superior, Longmont, Lafayette, and Louisville. The final graph before you on the scorecard represents non-residential impact fees. Red indicates general commercial fees, green indicates office fees, the royal blue or the blue indicates industrial fees, and the dark purple or the purple indicates affordable housing, or sometimes referred to as commercial linkage fees. In order to reflect the magnitude of fees despite the various fee structures, the scorecard graph calculates non-residential impact fees at a measurement of 1,000 square feet and then applies it to each area, and that's the number shown before you on this particular graph. Staff additionally separated out the affordable housing fees for clarity, though in the case of Boulder, they are typically typically addressed alongside other non-residential impact fees. And because of that, the amount represented for Boulder's affordable housing impact fee located on the screen before you is an average, as Boulder has a separate affordable housing fee levels for commercial, office, and industrial users. You may also see that Superior and Broomfield are not located on this graph, as no standard or comparable data was found to apply here. There was some additional data, including parking improvement fees. Research indicated that only Louisville and Lafayette have parking improvement fees. These are also frequently referred to as parking fee in lieu and are an option for developers to pay if they cannot supply required parking off-street within the development. In the full data set included in the packet for this item as attachment 1, you'll see some additional data included as well. For example, while staff was able to include Erie's impact fees as data in the preceding slide, their data delineates a number of different fees for very specific categories, ranging from business park to daycare facility. So while they have data to compare overall, they also have data that includes more specificity than some other communities in the category. Similarly, it should be noted that while Broomfield was a surveyed community, their varied fee structure is such that it makes it difficult to compare in the context of this specific scorecard overall. And that in general speaks to staff's general analysis, in that because of the complex structure of the TAP and impact fee schedules, it's difficult to clearly understand how each fee schedule compares to each other. Some community surveys are at a status in which more redevelopment than new development is occurring, or the inverse, in which more development rather than redevelopment may be occurring. And in this sense, there is a good deal of similarity between communities like Louisville, Boulder, and Longmont, as you see in the data before you and in the attachment 1. But it is difficult to compare communities directly. Overall, however, Louisville's current development fees are within the range of other communities. And with that, both Director Pierce and I are here for questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much to Kim for presenting to us this evening. And so with that, we'll turn it over to public comments on this agenda item. If there are any members of the public that would care to provide feedback for us on this agenda item, please raise your hand at this time. All right, not seeing any, I'll turn it over to council members for questions, comments, and discussion. Council members, Councilmember Brown, and then Councilmember Lipton.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. First of all, I appreciate the work that went into this particular scorecard. I think it's helpful information. I am also sort of struck by the challenges of comparing our various communities, especially when one of our communities, Lafayette, is in the process of changing their tap fees and you know, because I think they're basically undercharging for the water at this point, and they know it. So that makes it challenging. I think what would be perhaps more helpful in many ways, instead of comparing individual fees, which may or may not reflect the totality, it may be helpful to think of this in terms of a case study of a particular type of entity that wants to either be to join the community or be redeveloped or something along those lines. I think of this in the way that when you're comparing health insurance plans, there's something they have particular types of coverage that you might incur, such as if you give birth to a baby or you get a knee replacement, they'll say under this particular insurance plan, this is what you will pay. That's the kind of analysis that I'm looking for, is like, if I'm a small retail shop and I want to build or I want to develop and somewhere in a community, what am I going to pay in Erie versus Louisville versus Lafayette, et cetera. I think that's probably the best way for us to compare, to make sure that our community is comparable. So that would be my major suggestion in sort of the approach to this particular report. And I'll be interested to hear from staff whether something like that was considered.
Sure. So we did not contemplate doing it that way, and it's certainly a valid way to look at it. I think you just have to understand which particular type of business or user you're trying to understand the case study for, because I think as the water tap fees demonstrate, if you're dealing with a small commercial inline strip that's being developed that might have a couple service users and maybe small retail element, that is going to generate a very different tap fee than an industrial flex user coming in and needing a 4-inch or plus tap that's negotiated. So it's either that 4-inch fee or even higher is negotiated, and you would need to iterate that for each case, so to speak, as you're framing it. So I think if council's desire was for us to look at that, I think we would want to understand the particular types of businesses you're most interested in understanding the case study for, and then we would come up with scenarios and sort of that development that then and sort of match the user then with those fees.
Thank you, Director Pierce and Councilmember Lipton.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, first, let me start by thanking the team, Kim and Megan, for doing a really good job on this. And I think it's a good start. I think it's foundational, and I think it should evolve over time. You know, I've been asking for this actually for 3 or 4 years now, and this is the first bite at the apple I've seen, and I really do appreciate it. I think the emphasis on this is perhaps on the water tap issue or certain utility costs. And what I'm hoping eventually we get is what I would consider a balanced scorecard. So analyzing a number of factors, not just the utilities, but tax structure, you know, everything from sales tax, property taxes, fire district, you know, all in kind of thing. And there may be a number of other types of metrics that we can include in this. I think my intent originally on this is actually twofold. One is a marketing tool that Megan's office can use to be able to introduce us to businesses that are perhaps looking at opportunities in the area so they can compare our costs to costs of other communities, because we as a council have consistently heard we're just more expensive, we're slower, we're, you know, we have all these disadvantages that we've built into our systems. And I have not accepted that as being fact. It's all anecdotal, but I hear it from the business community. And this was a way to be able to have some objective data to, you know, be able to accept that or reject it or to explain certain aspects of this. So one was for marketing purposes. The other was to inform council on policy issues. So if, you know, we can see what our competitive advantages and disadvantages are in terms of the cost of doing business, and that should tell us something. And when we're being asked to make changes to the fees or to, you know, perhaps, you know, building services or other things that, you know, can help us make decisions on funding or allocation of resources, whatever it might be. So it's both for our internal decision-making purposes and setting priorities, but also for the prospect of marketing the community to new businesses or even retaining existing businesses. And to dispel the myths, if they are myths, that we're more expensive than everyone else. We take too much time to, you know, go through applications and do approvals and, you know, so on and so forth. So some of the metrics may be financial, some of the metrics may be other things that are important to businesses, like, you know, what is the development approval process time and whatnot. So I guess I do agree with Kyle that at some point it may be beneficial to, you know, develop additional context, like perhaps some case studies that, you know, you can show prospective businesses. But I also would strongly recommend we expand what I've called the balance scorecard to other metrics and collect more data and populate, you know, kind of a scorecard that we can use for the purposes I just mentioned. And that may take some time to do, but this is a good start and I do appreciate it. So thanks, Kim. Thanks, Megan. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Lipton. And next in the queue, we have Councilmember Fahey.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I'm going to add my thanks to Kim and to Megan. I think this is a wonderful first step, but as my former or previous councilmen have said, there is a few more things that we could do to make it a little bit more in-depth, detailed, and usable, applicable. And so I would agree that perhaps we could take an example of not only of a type of business, but the location for that business. Is it, and get the total cost for everything, for all the building fees and water taps and everything that would go into building, for example, a commercial building in the tech center in Louisville as compared to building in a tech center in Broomfield or Lafayette, or building a retail store or a grocery store in downtown or on McCaslin, as opposed to another town's downtown or McCaslin type area, so that we have a more of a one-on-one direct comparison for total cost. I just think it would be helpful to know it would cost you this much to build it here and it will cost you this much to build it there. Then we would get an answer to Councilman Lipton's question about, are we really more expensive? So that's what I would like to see.
Thank you, Councilmember Fahey. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Well, I think we're all kind of saying very similar things. And since I've been on council for 6 years, I've heard Councilor Lipton asking this question, and I have been too. When I first got on city council, in 2015, I was assigned to the Business Retention and Development Committee, and we heard a lot of people, the developers and the business people, talking about the cost of doing business in Louisville, and they had specific examples about their experience and how they felt it was more expensive or onerous or whatever it might be to do something in Louisville. And we've never really been able to, answer that question. So what we have in front of us tonight is really good. I think it provides a framework that I would like to see us work with and develop it even in a deeper way. But before I get to that, though, the idea of a case study perspective is something that I hadn't really considered. So thank you, Councilor Brown, for that idea. I think that's something we need to define a handful or a short list of these things so that we can sort of understand this. And, I think that as I think about what this is, and I think about the committees that we have on City Council, I think the Economic Vitality Committee could certainly work with staff on this and taking this assignment of creating or defining some of these case studies, and certainly want to get the business people and developers around town to participate in that as well. Because as I was looking at, the data that we were looking at, there's other things, and they've been mentioned already, but there's building fees, and we did talk about impact fees, the aspect of taxes, both sales and use taxes, metro districts, that's a big one, depending on where you're building something in town. Land costs may or may not be considered, but it's something we should at least, address. But the Councilor Fahey mentioned different industries. I guess I was looking at that in the sense of land use and location. And when you think about downtown, that's a really special one. We just talked about development downtown. And you know what? The answer is there's no tap fee because there's already a tap there. And so, at times when we do these scenarios or do these case studies, we'll need to recognize that may or may not be applicable as going forward. But Councilor Lipton talked about sort of the marketing or the external aspect, and also talked about a policy perspective. Our next agenda item tonight is to talk about business retention and sort of our BAP program and so forth. Whatever we come up with should inform that process. It should inform our policy as we look at that and understanding where some of those choke points or concerns might be for developments. And should we or should we not address them? It should come down to a policy issue and less about it. I feel like sometimes on the BAPs that we approve, which I've been voting for all of them, is what are we really specifically addressing here? And it has to be more than what one of the previous counselors would say is sharing some love. It needs to be something that actually is dollars that's making a difference for the economic engine of the town. So I like what we have here. I think there's a lot of potential, and I'm suggesting that the EBC takes this on, at least in a role of trying to do some of the case study perspective that was mentioned and trying to define this so that the rest of the council has something to react to and refine so that we can all share this policy tool. And that's the way I'm looking at it as a very important policy tool. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney. Councilmember Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, thanks to Megan and Kim. I know from conversations, there's a lot of digging. A lot of this information isn't readily available and super confusing. And even speaking to the municipalities, like, well, why do you want that information? Or it's not always like the easiest to get all that. So thank you so much for all the effort you put in. My hope is that, of course, this will be easier in the future to update, that these are pretty static numbers, for long periods of time. And so the work you did in this last several months will be accurate for a long period of time. And when it changes because there's been a policy change. So it should be pretty easy to get that information in the moment. As Councilmember Brown was mentioning, Lafayette might be changing some things there. It's like, well, easy to get those numbers because they just made a policy. So I'm hopeful that can stay current. And I think it's just one element of a toolkit for us, right? So if it's marketing, it's just one element of marketing to a business that's thinking about coming to Louisville. This is some information we have for you on top of things that are very easy for us to give them, sales tax issues. Those are very easy numbers to provide. And so I know why you didn't put them on this particular report, but this is part of that. I think it's probably part of what Councilmember Lipton was referring to, is that bigger cost of doing business for someone looking at it. I think it's hard. I think the case study is hard, right? Because of course, if you pick, there are a million variables. And so, well, okay, but if they did this and then did this, but then did that, and it's like you could go 100 different ways in all these different moment. So, picking something that either has come through or is coming through and saying, well, we know what it cost in Louisville because it happened 6 months ago. And then playing a little bit to try to figure out what would that have cost in Broomfield or Superior. And that's obviously the one possible project. And I don't know how many of those you have to do to get good information. But I think to Councilmember Lipton's point, if we find something that's like, oh, wow, yeah, okay, when we make these comparisons, it's a huge difference. And my assumption is that businesses are doing this. Businesses are looking at Louisville and looking at Broomfield and looking at Lafayette and trying to crunch those numbers. And of course, the price of land matters. And of course, the consumers potentially matter in that community, and the labor force matters in that community. There are so many things that matter as to why they might build there, and also how long it takes, and what is the city council like, and all these different things that people are deciding or looking at when they're deciding on where to go. And so it's, in some ways, it's impossible to get all of that into a clean document. And I can imagine you guys trying to figure out even how to present just this information that you got, like, okay, well, Bowlers looks like this and ours looks like that, and how do you get apples to apples? So I appreciate the graphs that you guys added to it, because that did help me at the end kind of get a better sense of it. But some of it was kind of like, whoa, okay, well, that's a big difference. So yeah, I mean, I think we've heard a lot of good feedback to come back to the EDC. Megan, I'm curious, what you think about, what Dennis said as well, and just, our ability to come back and, I think you guys crushed this piece of it, and how does it plug into other things, and how do we do more with it over the coming months and years? Be very interesting to talk about at another EDC meeting, and obviously bring it back here. But I guess that's all I have for now.
Thank you, Councilmember Dickinson. So really great discussion. There was a lot of consensus around moving forward. So there was 100% consensus around the thanks for Kim and Megan's efforts to this point so far and getting us to where we are. So I'll just reiterate that. And I think Councilmember Lipton, there was also a lot of thanks for him for bringing this item forward over the years and sticking with it so we could get going on this. And so thank you to Councilmember Lipton. So it sounded like the path forward is to continue to refine this to a further level, and that work would be done by coordination of staff and the Economic Vitality Committee. There were a lot of really great suggestions tonight, including picking some case studies out, looking at industry sectors or land use types. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney and Councilmember Fahey kind of talked about those things, like, do you look at industrial users, or do you look at restaurant users, or is it based on downtowns, those types of features. And then Councilmember Lipton pointed out just some other factors we're going to want to include, like taxes, land prices, some of these other things. And then once we have that table built out at EDC and kind of keep refining that and understanding it, that can both be a marketing tool that's developed at that point once EDC and council feel good about it. And then it can also be used to inform our discussions on how we might want to change our business assistance program to address areas where there are identified gaps. So that's sort of what I think I heard from the group. And so it's not exactly what anyone said, but I think the next step forward is to take it to the EDC and start to work through those things. And when you guys feel ready to bring it back to council, we'll talk about it again. Does that sound good to everybody? Great, I see a lot of thumbs up. And so that is great. And I just want to confirm with Megan and Kim that if we leave it at this point, that you're not going to walk away and say, we have no idea what to do next.
No, I think we're clear. So EDC is going to start talking about the business assistance program evaluation at its meeting this Friday. So I think we can start to touch on the feedback that we had tonight and sort of plot out what would be helpful to feed the BAP discussion, and then what we can work on additionally to develop those case studies. So no, I think we're clear, and we can start those discussions probably a little bit this week and then again in August.
All right, thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. And so our next item tonight for discussion is discussion direction on business retention, expansion, and attraction update. And Megan Pierce is going to tell us about that as well.
Okay, one more attempt at screen sharing for me tonight. So I apologize, my presentation for this item I did not get in the packet, but I did think it would be helpful given the amount of data sort of presented to council tonight related to the Economic Vitality Strategic Plan, as well as this update, to just capture a few highlights of what I outlined for you. And then I'm happy to dive into more detail on any areas that you would like to spend time on. So specifically, this is our business retention, expansion, and attraction update. And just first, very briefly, the Economic Vitality Strategic Plan provides a 3 to 5 year roadmap, and the retention, expansion, and attraction are really interwoven through those 5 goals, and you'll really see them and come out in a lot of the supporting actions and tasks in that plan. I think it's important to note that our strategic plan is a combination of initiatives that build foundational and core economic development practices, so things that we need to be doing to do other things better, as well as more innovative programs and things we hope to do in the future. Retention and expansion, attraction, these are things that staff does on a day-to-day basis. They're common activities, but they do also require this integration with the strategic plan because we're putting into place programs and strategies that will build upon and really take us forward in the future. Just noting, we had the scorecard update in your packet tonight, but the Economic Vitality Committee also reviews the strategic plan at each of its meetings, and that allows us the opportunity to review and revise our path. So very similar to our scorecard discussion tonight, we can look at something, we can decide what else we need, and that may influence other strategies in our plan. So first, touching on retention and expansion, and these terms in my field are sort of used interchangeably. So BR&E is business retention and expansion. It is what we place the most emphasis on in terms of our programming because it's the most cost-effective and efficient to retain a good business that you have than it is to go find a new one to put in its place. And we certainly all know that feeling from significant and long-term commercial vacancies. When those tenants leave, it's very difficult sometimes to replace them in that space as it existed previously. Our businesses, I think, especially in a town the size of Louisville, are part of the fabric of our community. And I think we saw that very strongly during the pandemic and the support people gave to keep local businesses open. So that's part of why we focus most on BR&E. Just currently, we're working with about 5 businesses locally, so businesses that are already located in Louisville, and they're evaluating either a relocation or an expansion. And frequently those conversations start because we have existing relationships that we form through other activities, other programs that we have. But a lot of times people also come to us for help finding space. And that's usually a lot of the work that goes into retaining businesses and helping them expand locally, as these may be independent small business owners that don't have a broker or they don't have a lot of resources to dedicate themselves to finding those spaces, and they need help doing that. This also has crossover with our business assistance program because that program applies as both a retention and an attraction tool. And this also involves a lot of, I call it our ombudsman activity. So, people come to Economic Vitality because they need to know where to start, what the requirements are, and what things they need to do. So continuing, a lot of the retention and expansion comes through retention visits. So those can be formal and structured, those can be informal, that I stop by a business or a business calls and we just offer to come out and meet with them. We have implemented a database to track our outreach as well as to what we hear from businesses, so that if we start to hear consistent themes, those may be things that we want to take a look at. And those themes could then, also influence our strategies in the strategic plan. These visits are also a lot of times where we hear about an expansion. So a business says, I'm tapped out on space, I need to hire more people, and light bulb goes on and like, oh, we need to keep you in Louisville, how can we help you? So retention visits, to be honest, have been a struggle, except for things that happened informally in the pandemic, because there was, a lot of concern around public health and safety. And people are just getting back to feeling like they want to invite people into their space. And also businesses have just been overwhelmed. So where I would like to see us get post-pandemic and recovery is to be at a pace of doing, 45 to 50 retention visits annually, because we have about 750 brick and mortar businesses. So, we need to be doing regular and consistent outreach with them, understanding their needs and anything that we can do to support them and keep them in Louisville. Another key point of data for retention and expansion is surveying. So we've done a fair bit of that during the pandemic. It's been very focused on COVID and how we supported our businesses through that period, but we also have a business satisfaction survey teed up for next year. Generally, the city will do one of those every other year. So it's a temperature survey, get a feeling from businesses about how things are working for them. And then communications is really sort of the third pillar of the retention activities. Really regular communications, our monthly e-newsletter, campaigns, webinars, things of that nature. So one thing I wanted to look at, just because I don't have the long tenure here, and I was concerned about the number of business closures we had during the pandemic, and it's certainly an impact. So this isn't meant to lessen what we experienced or some of what we're still likely to experience as things work themselves out, but we didn't experience more closures than Louisville typically sees in a year. So I went back and looked at about 5 years of business license data. And so when a business closes, they also close their business license or their sales tax license with us. So that's the most reliable way. And sometimes there's an iterative process that we see a business closed and we reach out to them and say, do you want to close your license? So we had 50 license closures related to brick and mortar businesses in 2020. So that was fewer than we had in 2018 and 2019. So I think that's reassuring that we didn't see that number shoot up. And I think a lot of that has to do with the support businesses felt, the things we were doing to communicate with them, and probably also, the financial assistance and opportunities they had. The additional thing we'll be working on related to the strategic plan, we'll do an exit survey, and those can be a bit hit or miss. I'll tell you from past experience, because you have to hit a business at the right time that they're leaving and they're willing to tell you why, but it can be helpful in developing more understanding about particular reasons. So oftentimes if a business does close or they close their license, they may tell us they're consolidating a facility or moving out of state, but we don't have a consistent way yet of tracking that data. Switching over to the attraction side of economic development, I think one of the biggest efforts I've had here is putting all of our attraction efforts into a platform so that we're able to track it and be more strategic about it, so that, if someone calls you and is interested in a business and they talk to you and then you don't hear from them for 6 months, you don't want to just call them out of the blue. We want to have regular and repeat contact with businesses that either we've identified that we want to bring to the community, or that a business that's identified Louisville as a potential location. So I'm using that platform to track our contacts with new businesses, brokers, property owners, types of inquiries we're getting, and also to make sure we follow up with them in a timely manner. So if we haven't heard from them, we got an application for assistance, but then things went silent, it's a mechanism for keeping tabs. What I consider to be active attraction efforts are those where we've actually done outreach, we've requested or provided information, or we've participated in the site selection in some way. So I don't consider just any phone call that we get or that I make to be an attraction effort. I think an effort is something where you actually have an established contact and you're working with someone and there's some form of relationship or information transfer going on. We get many more than the 14 active attraction efforts I'm representing, but like I said, those are the ones that I would say that are actively in our pipeline that I think could reasonably come to fruition, not just phone calls and inquiries that we get. Q2 and Q3 this year have been very active. So I've heard that from peers as well. So I think regionally, we're experiencing some of the same thing, just a lot of interest, a lot of activity, people looking for sites, looking for incentives. So of those 14, I've sort of broken it down for you in categories, working with about 5 restaurants, 5 retailers, 2 businesses in the service industry, and then 2 potential new primary employers. The attraction efforts really come from a really wide variety of sources, and I think that's important to understanding sort of the amount of effort that it takes and what maintaining an active pipeline of potential new businesses looks like. So we have businesses contact us, we have brokers contact us and property owners, and then staff initiates or staff directs efforts. So identifies businesses that would be a good fit for Louisville or would be a good fit for existing vacant spaces and performs that outreach on our own. We also do have a number of potential business prospects that come to us through Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation. Those are almost exclusively primary employer and industrial users, but we do respond to those proposals where we have sites that would be suitable fits for the needs. As mentioned, when I'm doing outreach and initiated attraction, I'm focusing on key vacancies. So every vacancy is important. It's specifically important to the person who owns that property and to a future tenant. But we do have commercial vacancies where we've had significant sales tax loss, and those are certainly very important to the community to be able to fill. And part of how that process works is that, ultimately the commercial property owner has to reach a successful deal with a tenant, and we don't negotiate those deals. So part of it is forming a relationship with the owner and with the broker so that it can be collaborative to the extent that's possible. So, we have some property owners that are very willing and want us to be interacting with brokers and with them and bringing them potential tenants. And we have other property owners that are less interested in that sort of collaboration. And so staff just has to work those things out over time. We do have, attraction efforts that also result from just being part of the process. So, things that are coming through the planning and zoning process. Economic Vitality staff is participating in, conversations about new development and redevelopment projects, and then oftentimes that leads to participating in the attraction. I think a good example of that is the project at 824 South and 957 Main. So staff was involved with that process. That also went to the Revitalization Commission for assistance there. It received a BAP through City Council, and then staff has been assisting with tenants. And there's a very cooperative relationship there with the owner and with the broker on that process. More of our interaction on the business assistance program is definitely related to new business attractions. Like I said, it's a tool that intends to serve both, but it is I think, a more attractive process to new businesses. So we definitely do more estimates for BAPs and bring more applications forward for new businesses than we do for existing business expansion. Of the agreements we've made since 2019 that I outlined in your materials, 8 of the new businesses to Louisville that received incentive agreements have either started their business or they're in the process. So I consider them either active or on their way to active. So, some of those businesses are still working on their development process or their facility, but they have actually initiated that process. So it seems like a more sure bet at this point in time. Just very briefly, calling out here that, as I mentioned, the strategic plan, we're going to be continually looking at that and making sure that the initiatives align with our current goals and what we need to be working on. But these are 3 items that are in the strategic plan that are either in process or are targeted for this year that really focus on specifically more attraction and the efforts we'll take related to those. And then, the Economic Vitality Strategic Plan also has a lot of overlap with Council's work plan related to the Economic Prosperity Program. So I think it's just a good reminder of sort of the synchronicity between the Economic Vitality Committee and Council and the Economic Vitality Strategic Plan, sort of holding that together. We have the Business Assistance Program. As I mentioned, we're starting work on that with EBC in July. That's tentatively scheduled for your review in September. I think that timeline could potentially change. We have a discussion on priority properties and areas for attraction efforts that's scheduled for later this year. And then tonight we started our discussion on the cost of doing business scorecard. So that's all I have in terms of presentation. As mentioned, I'm happy to answer any questions or dive deeper onto a particular area.
Thank you very much. And so we'll take public comment on this agenda item at this time. If there are members of the public that would like to add anything or give us any suggestions or feedback, please raise your hand and tell us what you'd like to tell us. Seeing none, that takes us back over to council questions, comments, and discussion. Council members have questions? Director Pierce, while people are thinking about raising their hands, I have a question for you if you could get into it a little bit more. So earlier tonight, we heard that there's no, there's too much commercial space in downtown and we can't fill it. So we've got to turn it all into residential. But then in the packet, it talks about, you've got all these people looking for space downtown that can't find it. So it seems to me that there's a mismatch of the types of people seeking space in downtown and the types of spaces that are available just between those 2 agenda items, right? Like there's this mismatch of information coming forward of this agenda item and that agenda item. And so what do we need to do to match that up so there's retailers seeking space in downtown and the spaces don't exist for them. So how do we match these people up with people redeveloping their properties so that they can have these types of spaces available in the future since there's a market for them? Or how do we get these people looking for spaces in downtown to be aware of commercial spaces that maybe don't fit perfectly for them, but that could fit? I guess if you don't understand my question, I'm happy to explain, but it looks like you might.
No, I understand your question. And I do think a mismatch is an appropriate way to describe it. So I don't think we have a surplus of commercial space in downtown. It's usually a question of needs and timing, I would say, is a couple of the particular businesses I'm working with that are interested in downtown want to own property, and that is very difficult. So there is very little commercial property that is available for sale downtown. And so those are often, very relationship focused, transactions that, someone hadn't thought about selling their property and are convinced to sell their property. But otherwise, what I run into the most, and when I do site search with a particular business, I want to understand where their primary goal is to be located, but I almost always present other options and maybe a few things that don't quite meet their requirements, just because, to your point, sometimes there's an ability to navigate that maybe a business thought they needed 2,500 square feet of commercial space, but when they understand how much that's going to turn out to cost, they're much more amenable to 1,500 or 2,000 square feet. And I would say that the cost factor is probably the other thing that we're up against. So other than sort of the mismatch of space needs and timing availability, I think cost. And that's been probably the other thing I've run into, is that people really want to be in downtown, but the affordability for their business model to be in downtown is a challenge.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. Megan, thank you very much for the presentation. And I know I've said this every time we've had these kind of presentations, but the fact that we have a strategic plan and we have a lens that we're all looking through and looking at this the same way is something that I attribute the good work of developing the strategic plan and you being well on top of things. So thank you very much for that. I have just a couple of sort of curious questions. On page 4 of your report, or your staff report, that lists the number of businesses that voluntarily closed. And I'm struck by the fact that in 2020 and even in 2021, the numbers are extraordinarily low when you compare it to previous years, where there seemed to be this normal cycle of opening and closing of businesses. What does that mean? Do you have a sense for that? Because I look at it and go, I don't get it. I would have thought more businesses would have closed because some of the smaller businesses, I just don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, and you know, to be very frank, I was a bit surprised at the numbers, especially as I broke it down into the categories, because I think I didn't want to just look at the total number of licenses that had closed, because, you know, as I sort of outlined, you had to go through a process here of all licenses, sorting out the outside city licenses, the people that have residential businesses. We did see, I think, a higher number of residential-based licenses and businesses call it quits in 2020 and maybe say, you know, this is just not the time for me to do this. I really think that, and it's a combination, and I think we heard it from businesses, that the support that businesses received locally through our grant programs and also the resources available to businesses through the state and the federal in terms of loans and other assistance, I think was very meaningful. So I think businesses that sought those resources out and were very diligent about that, and probably also made some sacrifices early on that may have meant furloughing staff and, you know, cutting hours and doing different things, I think we're relatively successful. So I think we had people that were, and from conversations I've had, we had business owners that were creative and pivoted and they sought out resources. And so I think we were able to stave off having a lot more closures than we would typically see. I would guess that 2021 will be a bit of a reset. So I would expect that we might see, this has been my fear, is that at some point in time, things will catch up, right? And my biggest fear has been businesses that had deferred rent. So maybe they got an agreement to defer some rent payments that they have, but at some point those come due. And so commercial, you know, property owners will be at a point of looking for those. But I don't have a for sure answer for you, but just, you know, narratively and financially, the number of our businesses that received PPP loans and received local assistance, I think in combination with the number of businesses that took it upon themselves to pivot. You know, with the manufacturing closures, we had several, you know, not large employers, but, you know, more significant employers consolidate facilities. You know, if they had a facility here and a facility out of state, say we're just going to have one facility, but we did not see the retail closures that I think we may have expected.
Thank you. I think that was a pretty good answer. And then a very quick question. So restaurants, do they show up in services, finance, and leasing? Where do restaurants show up?
They show up in retail.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very nice report. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Fahey?
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, I want to add my thanks also. I think this is a wonderful report. It's very comprehensive. My question is, if we go back in time, can we talk to our business owners and find out why they decided to come to Louisville to begin with, and then use those reasons to attract new businesses, or maybe find out if those are still valid reasons to come to us? Or find out if we've done something that's, you know, turned them away for some reason and we don't know what it is. And it might not be the financial cost. It might be something entirely different. But I just think if we talk to the business owners who are here, we might find out how to bring in more.
So I think you may secretly be an economic developer, and I just didn't know it, but we do that. And we need to continue to do better at it. So I have integrated in terms of our formal retention visits. We ask a business that question directly, and we have sort of a list of possibilities that if something doesn't come to mind, it's like, well, was it location to home? Was it, you know, as a place to live? Is it tax structure, transportation? But usually you ask a business that and they have a very direct answer and they have a very quick answer. So if you ask the owner of a small business, or if you even ask the CEO or COO of a company that, you know, has 100 employees here, they usually have a very direct answer for that. And it is part of what we then try and use in our marketing materials. And, you know, for example, one way we would incorporate it is when we receive prospects from Metro Denver Economic Development Corporation, those come with a list of requirements that we must respond to. So a business says that it needs a facility that meets all of these requirements, and they also want all of these amenities. And one thing I do is look at the type of business and what we know about this potential prospect. And if we have like businesses in Louisville, then we try and learn from those like businesses and use that in our pitch to those potential new businesses, because there's usually a lot of synergy. So, if you have a biopharma, manufacturer located in Louisville, and there's another one looking here, you usually have something to learn about why they came here in the first place and how we can attract others.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilmember Fahey. Councilmember Lay.
Director Pierce, thank you very much for that presentation. That was very good, and pulling that together for us and kind of keeping us abreast of what's going on here is just I appreciate it, and I appreciate your analysis, and I appreciate your uncertainties because there obviously are some. I wonder, EBC has a part of this responsibility, but I wonder what kind of thoughts you have around some of the business retention visits that you're doing. You said that those they're challenging to kind of work in with all the other things that you're doing. I wonder whether it might be helpful on some of them to have some of us or one of us go, and at the very least tag along, but I think more to the point, demonstrate how seriously we're taking these efforts and that they're important enough to us to actually not just send staff, which is huge, but to say this is a team effort, and we're really interested in getting to know and letting you know how much we appreciate you in doing business. And I think there's sometimes that can help. I've been on some business retention visits, I think before you arrived, and there's something very, I don't know, something very much appreciated by some businesses on that. And I'm not sure that directors of economic vitality necessarily would find those useful to have council members aboard. But I do think, I wonder if you thought about that and wondered whether that might be something that would be a possibility.
Sure, I think, and that's been something on my mind. I think we need to spend some time sort of revisiting or revising. I kind of got some more form and shape to the retention program when I started, and the visits, setting up this database, making sure we're tracking themes. It also helps us understand space, just finding out how many employees people have and how much space they have leased and all those sort of factors. But I was coordinating visits with the Business Retention and Development Committee, and I think we haven't had really a time to sort of revisit and say, how should we conduct these visits? And I think what that involves is sort of developing a little more strategy than we've had the benefit of during the pandemic, to say that there are some targeted industries and types of businesses that we would like to definitely make retention visits with, and then open that opportunity to members of council, members of staff, other stakeholders that we might find would have value in that. And I think as long as we keep it to a manageable size and we set expectations with businesses, because I find that's always very well received. If we say these visits won't take more than an hour, we ask that you give us the benefit of your time, a tour of your facility. We'd like to learn from you. And I think as long as we tell them who's going to come and what our expectations are and what we'd like to get from them, that's usually not problematic. So I think there are going to be some very key primary employer conversations that we need to engage with over the next 6 months to year. We have some businesses, especially in the technology center, that are growing at a very rapid pace and certainly might have opportunities to expand outside Louisville. And so we want to make sure that to the extent possible, that expansion can occur here. And so those visits can go a long way to just communicating our support of the businesses, and that's not just staff, it's from the council and the community.
And Director Pierce, I appreciate that, especially. I think one of the points that you emphasized is one that I've said multiple times, which is it's always easier to be able to get to retain and help expand a business than it is to reel a new one in. And not to say that the second isn't important and something that we need to do. We obviously need to do it, but I see in a number of the local business publications I read just massive amounts of money that are being raised by businesses in the tech center. And it's wonderful. And, a lot of that goes for, certain kinds of equipment and instruments and things like that. and plenty goes for just burn rate with just human beings there. But there's probably expansions that are going to happen. I think you've already talked a little bit about that. And if we can get out ahead of that, I think it's great. I think, you know, this is one of the challenges with an EDC that has only 3 members and 1 staff member at the moment, is trying to keep a pulse on all that information is going to be challenging. I think to the extent that we can try to be as proactive as we can, all the better. And I think to the extent, you know, I don't obviously speak for anybody but myself, but I hope that, you know, council members would be willing to step up if we need to make those kind of contacts. And not just to show the kind of love, it's more to really demonstrate that we care about the jobs, we care about their contributions, we care about their involvement in the community. All of these things are really important. And I know you're trying to do that, and I very much appreciate all your efforts there, because it's hard work and heavy lifting. So thank you for all you're doing.
And Councilmember Light, just recognizing that some council members, I know Councilmember Dickinson spends a tremendous amount of time doing this already. I know I'm doing this. So, and just, you know, we need to have a more coordinated focus. So I just want to recognize that you asked council members to step up, but like Councilmember Dickinson, I know is doing it. So I just didn't want it to be taken the wrong way. So just, you know, make sure that we're following the types of behaviors we want to promote, and make sure that we have a coordinated effort. And then the other point that was brought up was around retention over attraction. And I understand the point on retention and the value of retention, but our community members, the concern that they continue to bring and the issues on the work plan are around large format retail vacancy. And so we can't retain those people. They're not here. We can't do anything to retain people in the large format retail vacancies that are gone. And so we have to make efforts in this area, because the community has an expectation that we do something to address it. So even though it would be nice to try to retain people in these spaces, they are not there. And so we're going to have to make an effort on attraction. And so we have to ensure that we don't drop that by the wayside. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mary. Yeah, I appreciate your comments on that. I've raised that particular issue in previous meetings, and I know that, you know, many of us, if not all of us, are concerned about that particular issue, and because it's one that we hear about. Someone wrote to me just today about vacancies in Parcel O. So I'd like to continue to see that to be a focus. I noticed that in the report there was some notes about sort of conversations that staff may be having to fill those spots. I also recognize that in some areas of town there are externalities related to covenants and whatnot. But I do think that it's important for us to continue to market Louisville in a positive way and try to attract spaces, work with developers to divide spaces when it's not possible to attract large big box stores, those types of things. So we just have to continue to think creatively about that and continue to make sure that that's in our strategic plan. And I know that I think Q4 we're scheduled to get some more updates about attraction efforts. So I will be interested to see that. But you know, people continue to write in about this. People continue to be concerned about it. It was a major thing that we talked about during my interviews for council. And so I'll continue to put that plug in. So thank you, Mayor, and thank you to staff for continuing those efforts. And I hope that they will double down on that.
All right, well, I don't see any other hands up in the queue on this agenda item. So we thank you, Director Pierce, for the update this evening, and look forward to periodic updates, whether they're written or in council like this again. This is a really important topic, and you've made good headway on it. So our next discussion this evening is around discussion direction on returning to in-person meetings. And so City Clerk Muth is going to give us a presentation tonight on this agenda item. You're on mute.
I'll try that again. So what happens when people say you're good at something, then you screw it up as soon as that happens. Good evening, everyone. I'd like to have a conversation with you tonight to discuss when you'd like to all get back together in a room and see each other in person again. And the other question tonight is we'd like to get some direction from you on when you'd like to see the boards and commissions meet in person again. With the large numbers of people being vaccinated and city facilities being open to the public again, we are recommending City Council and the boards and commissions return to in-person meetings. Staff suggestion is that council begin meeting in person in mid-August. We could meet in council chambers. There's enough room to social distance, and there is plexiglass barriers that can be placed between each of the council members on the dais. Additionally, we're suggesting that staff and council members all attend the meetings in person, that we don't do a hybrid where half people are in person and half people are at home. It's become increasingly clear that it's difficult when best option is usually one or the other, but not a hybrid of the both. When some people are in the room, they feel like the meeting doesn't go well. When some people are at home, they don't feel they'll be heard as well. So our suggestion is one or the other, but not a hybrid. We have included in the packet for you tonight a copy of your rules of procedure. They were last updated in March of 2020 when the world went crazy and we all went home. The new version in your council packet leaves an option in that would require council members to be in person at meetings unless there's an emergency, in which case everybody would be at home and doing a meeting remotely. If you are interested in moving that change to your rules of procedure forward, we would bring that to you in a later meeting for approval. Also going forward, staff is recommending that while we do want to have staff and council members in council chambers, we would like to integrate into council chambers an option to have Zoom integrated for people at home. And again, not for council members to be there, but for members of the public to be able to listen to the meeting and comment via Zoom. We are working on this. We've hired a contractor to do this. However, we are waiting for some hardware. So we won't be able to have that ready to go until mid-September at the earliest. That's when we're expecting to get the hardware in. However, with certain supply chain issues and computer chips, it may be a little longer than that. The meetings we would suggest be held with that Zoom option would be the 3 meetings that we broadcast. So City Council, Historic Preservation Commission, and Planning Commission. So along those lines with boards and commissions as well, we are hearing that boards and commissions are very anxious to get back to meeting in person. They would like some direction to be able to do that. Our question for you is if you want them to do that, and if so, again, we would suggest that we give them the option of either all remote or all in person, but we need some direction from you on how to do that and how soon you'd like them to do that. I know some of the boards wanted to meet in person this month, and we told them they had to wait a little bit longer. So some direction on that would be helpful as well. So if you guys can discuss those 2 items and give us some direction this evening, we would be appreciative.
Thank you very much for the presentation. And so we'll turn to the public and ask if there are any members of the public that would like to provide feedback on this agenda item. Seeing none, it takes us back over to our council discussion. Councilmember Lay.
Clerk Muth, the question that I had just was around the Zoom integration. I can't say enough how much I support that. I think that one of the things, for all the problems that Zoom has caused, or things that we don't like about it, one of the things that is really good is that it does, I think, permit people who might otherwise not be able to be at the meetings because they have childcare responsibilities, they have work, they have mobility issues, maybe things like that. They're able to tune in, and I think that's been a real positive. I think it's also incredibly important that we give people the opportunity to actually have a voice without being in council chambers with the rest of us. I've been really happy about that ability that we've given people. So I support that really strongly. But I wanted to know how can you say a little more about the challenge there, or anything you foresee as being problematic? I think you're on.
There we go. We've brought in a contractor who's done this for some other city council chambers. Most recently, I think they've done Erie and Thornton. And what they're able to do is what the people would see at home on Zoom would actually, instead of being everybody in a little box, would be the broadcast of the meeting from council chambers. So they would get one picture. So that's the first thing that the integration does. The second thing it does is it fixes the feedback problem you have with all the different microphones feeding in and out. So if you can get those 2 things addressed for people at home, they look like they're looking at a regular meeting. And for you guys in council chambers, you would see or hear comments the same way you hear them now. When we do public comment, we would just call on people through the attendee list the same way and include them in the list of the people who are in the room.
Thank you, Councilmember Lay. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney.
Thank you, Mayor. Meredith, I have my first question is the 2 items that you want us to comment on is the date which we are comfortable coming back in-person meetings in council chambers.
Correct.
And the second one is what?
If you would like to allow boards and commissions to meet in person, we've told them to date, it's dependent upon when you guys meet. So.
Okay. Well, my feeling about getting back together in person, I would be comfortable if we did it starting after Labor Day, so in September. I think we have enough variants going on and things with COVID that I'm not really excited about meeting in council chambers. I guess my third question, Meredith, is what is the maximum number of people that can be in that room?
There's a little sign on the wall. I think I would know what it says, but I think it seats about 60 or 70 people. Right, I would assume we would limit that to spread people out as we could.
Okay, so that could be some limit. So anyway, we're talking about potentially as many 60 people in the room. So I'm not in a hurry to do this. I think that, coming up with a strategy maybe after Labor Day is fine. I think there's an irony in the fact that we're talking about accommodating people over Zoom who don't want to be in council chambers when we can have 60 people in there. I don't think it's a bad idea, but I do think there's some irony there that we're accommodating for something that we're putting our own selves at risk of doing. The other comment I have is some of us are, obviously older than others, and we are more at risk. And there may be potential reasons where it's a necessity to be able to participate in meetings and not being in person. And I'm not talking about out of convenience. I'm talking about out of necessity because you cannot be in a situation like that. And so what I'm going to ask for some discussion on with my colleagues here is, if you do have a defined necessity, a doctor's note or whatever we want to call it, why wouldn't we allow members of council to participate in council meetings when they can't really be in the room? I'm not saying that you could do it anytime you feel like it. Although, what's kind of nice now is some of us aren't even in the same state and we're participating. But why wouldn't we, out of necessity for individuals, allow that to happen? So that's just my thoughts on this topic. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Maloney. Next in the queue is Councilmember Fahey.
Thank you, Mayor. I will say I also am interested in meeting in person. I'm not sure about the date. I can probably go along with what everyone else decides. But I have two concerns, I guess. One is what the ventilation system is like. Has it been improved at City Hall and in the chambers in particular? And is it measured for what the accumulation of things is? I mean, I know my husband measures our CO2 level all the time just to find out if we've got circulation. That would be one concern that I have. The other is I attended a Zoom call for the fire department, and they do it with one screen that shows the whole room. And the view was fine, but the sound was horrible. So I could hear the speakers that were speaking right into the microphone at the table, but I couldn't hear what the firemen at the dais were saying at all. And so if those kinds of things are kind of worked out, figured out, then I would be happy with whatever the council decides on when we should go back. And I would say the advisory boards could go back whenever we do.
Councilmember Lipton.
Well, I mean, I think this is an important conversation. I think inevitably we've got to reopen our government and our community engagement in-person meetings. So to me, it's not a matter of whether we do it, but when we do it. And I'm a little conservative on this. I really don't want to rush into it. I've got some personal reasons for that. I am the oldest person on council. If I happen to get COVID or some variant or something, then I'm going to be in serious trouble. I also am a caregiver for my 92-year-old mother, and she's even at more risk than I am, obviously. And I think the science on asymptomatic spread is not exact yet, particularly with the new variant. And I've got some personal experience with the new variant. I have a very close family member who came down with what is believed to be the Delta variant after he had already gotten COVID last November. And he was between shots, but he had at least one shot. And he came down with the COVID again last month, and it was a lot more serious than the first time around. And in that case, arguably, I was exposed to him. And I certainly don't want to bring that into a meeting, or I'm sure any of us that might have some knowing or unknowing exposure certainly don't want to bring that into a public meeting. So, I'd feel a little better about this if we can push it into sometime in September. I'd just like to see how the next, 30 to 45 days goes, both regionally as well as locally. I think I do have a few questions for Meredith, if I may. In the memo, you talked about regular Tuesday evening meetings. And do you intend all meetings or just the regular meetings? And and does it have to be the same?
No, it's up to you guys, whatever you guys want to decide.
okay, so you could do perhaps study sessions or something, and more in a more virtual format, and I mean, we obviously have some flexibility in picking and choosing. Okay. And then I do have questions about the room. It doesn't sound like we're going to have social distancing requirements. I mean, 60 people in that room, even when there wasn't a pandemic, was at times a little bit, sketchy. And if we're going to go forward with this, I would like to suggest that we do have some social distancing requirements if we're going to have the public in council chambers. Are we going to have any kind of requirement for vaccinations? I know that's a very difficult thing to do, but is it prudent for us, if we're going to be or have people in the room in tight quarters, to require vaccinations? Or how do we want to handle that? I think certainly California has moved back to a model where they're requiring masking indoors. Are we going to require any kind of masking? And what about the sanitation of microphones? Are we going to make sure that somebody's going to wipe down the microphone after each person speaks? And like Deb was suggesting, what about the ventilation system? Is that going to be enhanced as we continue through the pandemic and have in-person meetings? Because I think arguably the existing ventilation system, it worked when you worked it manually, and it was really had set points for a large amount of exhaust. But some staff member's going to have to manage that when we get back together. So those are some questions I had. Certainly I shared my concerns about getting back quickly for obvious medical reasons, but also the environment that we put people in and invite people to come into, including ourselves, in terms of the council chambers. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Dickinson.
Thank you. I'll just add that I'm comfortable with whatever the group decides. I recognize that I'm younger than some of my colleagues. I'm double vaccinated, and I'm taking other risks at this point because of my vaccination status. That I eat indoors at restaurants at times, and I gather with people for birthday parties and things like that. And so my daily behavior is such that going to a council meeting would not be a larger risk than the risks I'm currently comfortable with. So I'm personally capable of having in-person meetings tomorrow, but I understand I'm part of a larger group and happy to try to figure out a way to have it work for all of us if possible. And if that wasn't a known, if my opinion wasn't known, it is now known, but just adding to the conversation. The one thing, I guess one other thing is with the delay in hardware and or the setup, I do think it's important that for people who, the EDI conversation and accessibility of all types of people, and then also COVID fears and people's unwillingness to come to the meeting, I think it's really important that we have Zoom, which is of course the plan, that we have Zoom or some interaction capabilities for people who aren't present. And so if that isn't ready August 17th, I could see why maybe we wouldn't be ready August 17th to be having those in-person meetings if the setup isn't ready. So maybe that's one idea, is as soon as the setup is ready, maybe that's a date to do it. Maybe that's not helpful, but there's just another idea.
Thank you, Councilmember Dickinson. Councilmember Brown.
Thank you, Mayor. I appreciate it. I want to ask the city clerk a question about other municipalities. How are they handling this? Because I know everyone went virtual, and which of our municipalities that are surrounding have gone back in person at this point?
I don't have a guaranteed list. I know that Lafayette, Boulder, and Longmont have all gone back in person. I believe Lafayette is incorporating a Zoom way to listen, not to watch the meeting, but you can listen to the meeting and comment that way, I believe. I'm not sure about some of the other cities. I do think a lot of them are starting to go back right around now if they haven't been already.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Actually, let me rephrase. I think Boulder tried it and had some technical difficulties, and then they withdrew. So they're trying to fix that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I think it's certainly not dispositive, right? It's certainly something that we should consider, because what other municipalities are doing creates expectations in our community. But it is, we need to do what's right for our council and our community. I think I'm appreciative of the comments around sort of continuing to have sort of a cyber option even when we're back in person. I also appreciate Councilmember Lipton's comments about like needing to get back to normal to some degree. I am also, you know, as a father of children who cannot be vaccinated because the vaccine has not been approved for them yet. Also concerned about that risk, but I'm also relying upon the CDC's, you know, recommendations and their guidance around, you know, vaccinated people like myself not being spreaders. So I think we're entering into a phase that's particularly challenging. I think for parents. I think it's particularly challenging for older folks as they stare down you know, a new variant and the potential for additional mutations and uncertainty about the you know, about the status of that. So I think I want to get back to in person for the, you know, you know, I do want to get back to in person, and I'd like to do that this fall. I'm also mindful that like if we were to go back in person, it's probably the case rates are really low right now, especially in Boulder County. It's probably safer to do it now than it would be as we get towards winter, right? We're going to be staring at flu season. We're going to be and as we saw last year, the potential for a huge, you know, a COVID spike. I think the vaccinations will help with that, but I'm sort of mindful that like we may want to do it sooner rather than later, and then reassess in the fall as the weather gets colder, just simply because, you know, just so that we can, if there's interest in getting back to I wouldn't want, I guess, you know, we do what we have to do for public health, but anyway, I'm sort of thinking out loud here, which is not always the greatest thing to do during a council meeting, but I just want to say how much I appreciate what everyone is struggling with, including the Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Lipton and others. So we'll, you know, I think August 17th, I could certainly be convinced with that. If other folks want to wait until after Labor Day, I can probably deal with that. But if we are going to go back in person before the fall, I wouldn't want to wait too much longer than after Labor Day.
Thank you for everybody's comments. So I'm going to do my best to propose a couple of paths forward based on the comments. They didn't all exactly line up perfectly tonight, but I'll try to propose something and see if we can get consensus around a proposal. So it sounds to me like the concerns on just talking about the council meeting at first, we want to make sure when we go back that the technology is set up. So we don't want to get in there and then have echoing issues, have the microphones not work, have people not hear us. So we want it to have been tested and be working before we go back. And we want someone with some airflow experience to evaluate whether or not the HVAC system is working appropriately and circulating air at an appropriate rate for people in an auditorium type setting. There was a comment in the packet around having plexiglass panels around us. And I understand that that creates a perception that we will be more protected from one another, but whoever looks at that airflow, I would hope they would consider that, because it could create dead spaces that are getting no circulation. And then we could all just, yeah, it could be, it might just be a perception and not a reality that it's creating any safer of an environment. And it could also block fire sprinkler access. So just, we don't need to have them up for the sense of safety. We should actually consider what is the better solution. And included in that planning process is just understanding whether we'll require masking of individuals that come in or not, and whether we'll have someone cleaning the microphone between speakers or not, and then after council meetings, what the cleaning procedure is of the entire room. And it sounded like there was, I don't know if I've said this already, I apologize if I'm being redundant, but it sounded like there's consensus for when those things all happen and Labor Day has passed to come back to council chambers. So I think that would be the path forward. If the technology is not ready, then we wouldn't go back. If Labor Day hasn't hit, then we wouldn't go back. But once those two things are satisfied, that we would go back. That's what I heard the majority kind of leaning around. So I hope that folks can accommodate that. The other issue, I see one thumbs up, is I'll pause there for a second. Are folks able to get to circle the wagons around that sort of idea?
Could I ask a question?
Yes, Councilmember Lipton.
So what's your thinking on social distancing of attendees and staff, for that matter?
I didn't hear a lot of discussion around that.
Yeah, we can, I think our plan would be we'd spread staff out as much as possible at the staff tables. And I don't think we'd encourage full capacity, particularly if we have an option for people to either watch on channel 8 or via Zoom, but we could set it up however you guys are most comfortable. I will say for all the public buildings now, regular people coming in, we're not requiring masks. We have a sign up that says we encourage them for you if you're not vaccinated. So it would be a change in our policy to suddenly require them during the council meeting. Doesn't mean we couldn't do it. It just would be a change in our policy.
Councilmember Lipton, do you have a proposal on the distancing?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think we need to have we have to have a requirement, in my mind, for social distancing for people that are going to sit through a city council meeting. And it may not be an issue for most meetings because we don't have that great attendance, but certainly the placement of chairs and elimination of chairs would be what I would be looking for in the audience. The vaccination and masking is a really tough thing, I guess. And so if we decide to do this in September and there's some resurgence and, in cases and whatnot, maybe we could then consider, stronger measures like masking or, something like that. But, maybe if we just had enough social distance and reduce the occupancy and, we could certainly choose to wear masks if we wanted to, I guess. I think that's a good starting point. And starting it in September, once the technology is actually installed and tested, might be a good approach. So I could get behind that if we can deal with the audience size, I think.
Thanks, Councilmember Lipton. And a couple of times it's come up that people are talking about adding this new option for people to provide remote testimony. And I just want to remind that we always have accepted email and video and audio testimony ahead of the meeting. And so we can still continue to encourage that too. And in fact, sometimes that's more useful because you can actually reflect on people's comments for a longer period of time. Councilmember Brown?
Yeah, I think it's worth us mentioning that sort of city policy related to gatherings and seniors in particular in other settings. I think in particular, we've brought back the in-person lunches at the senior center. We're not requiring social distancing or masking, folks. We're just saying what the city clerk says, which is, you don't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated. It strikes me as somewhat challenging for us to do something different, and I'm not necessarily arguing that. I think we should be mindful that if I'm a person watching at home tonight and I'm aware of the senior center and then I'm looking at this particular conversation, there could be the perception that when it comes to us, we have different standards than it comes to the general public. And so I want to be mindful of that as we have this conversation and make sure that we're holding ourselves to the same standards as we are sort of the broader community and the policies that we have in other city facilities, including the library and the rec center and the senior center. So.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Councilmember Dickinson?
Thank you, Mayor. While I have no personal concern about the meeting, I think the thing that comes up for me is the duration of the meeting. I think we're hitting hour 4 right now. And so unlike some other settings where people can come and go quickly into the city building, we're talking about a half a day's worth of work in one sitting in one room. And so I think it would be good to, have extra precautions for these meetings because of their duration, including maybe, hourly breaks to get out and get fresh air and come back, which we don't normally do right now, which obviously extend the meeting by 5 minutes times 4 hours. So another 20, 25 minutes added on, but that's something we do in our office, as we say, no meetings for over 1 hour in any room. You have to clear that room and go back to your space or go outside or have walking meetings. So I think just the fact that the meetings are as long as they typically are, 2, 3, 4 hours, that it probably does, whatever those precautions are, I think it's valid that we might need extra precautions for these meetings than we need for some other things that the city is doing or in charge of.
All right, so thanks for those comments on the in-person meeting. So I think we have a plan that when the technology is ready and it's after Labor Day, we can go back to in-person council meetings and there'll be social distancing of the seats within the room. The other topic is on the other boards and commissions. And I do think the other boards that are not having public hearings are differently situated than council and planning commission and historic pres. So in those cases, you get large attendance. It's got to be televised. You have to have public comment on, audio that everyone can hear and all of that. Some of the other boards are in a more advisory capacity or in a more working capacity. So like the Cultural Council is putting on the summer concerts in the park this year. And so they're all going to be, they've been meeting virtually, but they're going to be meeting at the summer concert in the park on Thursday. You know, there might be good reason for them to be able to get together. So I would like to propose that the boards that don't have public hearings can decide for themselves on when they can come back to in-person meetings. Is that proposal acceptable to council members? Councilmember Lay, do you have a question or an alternate proposal? You looked like you might not like that proposal. So I just wanted to, I didn't want to.
I don't quite understand it, maybe.
Okay, I was just trying to propose that. So there are the Planning Commission, Historic Preservation Commission, and Council use the similar technology that would all need to be ready and follow the same pattern. But the other boards, instead of having to be on the path with the council, to just have our policy be that each of those boards could decide for themselves when they can meet in person. So if the board decides, you know, it's not safe for them, you know, they could continue to Zoom, allow Zoom public comment, and continue all Zoom. If they decide that they are ready to go back, they could go back all in person, because they're not televised, they're not on microphones, like they don't have the same technology in any case, in any event. And some of them, like for the example I used was the Cultural Council, are putting on programming this summer. So they will be getting together for the summer concerts in the park for the actual programming, but they've not been able to get together for their meetings. So it's just sort of, some of them, it sort of creates some confusion.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think I certainly, I don't know, it seems to me the presumption ought to be uniformity, that we all, you know, all city commissions, committees, et cetera, do the same thing as much as they can, as much as they need to. I guess only because I could foresee, I don't think we're done with pandemics, frankly. And so the more exceptions we create, potentially, the more future trouble we're making for us, for ourselves, for other commissions and committees and future councils. So I guess that's what I'm struggling with. I understand the practical difficulties. If you're going to be meeting anyway, I suppose some could accelerate it. But I don't know that I'd want to say, well, each of y'all can figure out how you want to do this. Because, you know, I could see is there going to be one committee that or commission or board that just says, hey, we want to stay Zoom indefinitely, and is that going to be okay with us?
Well, so I think perhaps I'll curtail my proposal slightly to just say, as long as we're under a state of emergency, they can decide, if they're the non-public hearing boards, to go at this point in time whether or not they go back. And, you know, we could have another discussion in 3 months that says it's a new point in time and, you know, circumstances have changed. I just do think, I totally respect your point around when circumstances are the same, we should apply uniformity. But I think in this case, the circumstances may be different for some types of boards versus others. And so that's why I was trying to find some nuanced solution based on just, I've gotten quite a lot of feedback from boards and commissions that they would like to meet in person. And so I'm trying to understand that and ensure that we can get the feedback and collaboration from those boards in the best way possible too. And so all of this is very tricky, and that's where I was trying to thread the needle with the proposal. Next up, we have Councilmember Fahey, and then we have Councilmember Dickinson.
Thank you, Mayor. I wanted to say that there is a difference between us and the other advisory boards in particular. And much as I love having all of the advisory boards meet on Zoom, because then I can log in without leaving home. I don't have to go find a parking place, and I can get to a lot more meetings this way. There are groups that meet, like in the meeting room at the library or in the rec center, where there are huge open rooms with lots of spacing available. So it could be that they can decide the way that we meet, it would work. They could even decide to meet outside. I'll say I have what I call a city chat for my neighborhood that we've been doing all winter Zoom, and now we're back to doing it on my driveway. Everybody comes and brings a lawn chair. So it can be done in ways that are safe. And I think it would be up to them to decide what they feel comfortable with.
Councilmember Dickinson?
Thanks. Yeah, I appreciate Councilmember Lay's concerns. I do think it's answered by the delineation of who does get to do this. Like, it's not one size fits all, but it is very clear that these three, HPC, planning, and council, are going to be on one track, while others can be on this other track. And then I think you brought up some good points. I think, Mayor, maybe solve some of them as she spoke, but that we can, this isn't forever. This is just while we're in a state of emergency, and then we'll be going back to normal. And yeah, it'll be interesting. And I guess the only clarification would, so did I say that right, Mayor? Or do you have any different opinion about like finance committee or like council committees? Do they go the same way council goes, or do they go the same way boards and commissions go?
I think everything you said was right, and just hearing the dialogue tonight and trying to keep the conversation as short and tight as possible, my recommendation would be that council committees go the way that council's gone.
Great.
Councilmember Brown?
Thank you, Mayor. The question that I would have was about your proposal about the technology being ready, because the city clerk indicated that there was a potential supply chain issue for some of the Zoom integration. Is your proposal that the technology that we're waiting for the full integration of Zoom in order to fully go back, or would we add that at some later point?
So what I had heard council members say is that it was important to them when we go back to be able to accept public comment by Zoom. And so I heard the clerk say that we're on track to have that sometime in September. And it's just that nobody can say anything for certain anymore. And so she put in a little bit of language to say, if it doesn't happen in mid-September, it's because there's a global pandemic, these unforeseeable things are happening, and it may take longer, but we're on track for September right now. So the proposal I intended to make was that we would have the integration done so that it would accommodate what council members were saying. And if something happens catastrophically, that means that's not going to happen until March, we're going to have another conversation. I mean,
okay. I'm comfortable with that as long as we agree to revisit that. If it is truly a global supply chain issue or something like that, and we won't be able to do it, we won't be able to get the parts or something like that. I just would hate for us to say, well, we can't come back in person simply because we can't get the right technology or whatever. I think there's workarounds and other ways that we could do that. So.
All right. So I don't see any more hands on this topic. I just want to ask City Clerk Muth and the city manager if we have indeed given direction that's clear enough.
I think I have what I need certainly for you guys for council chambers, and we'll meet with facilities and talk about some of the issues you brought up. And for boards and commissions, I can discuss with all the liaisons. The option for those that don't broadcast is to talk to your members and decide if you want to meet in person or hybrid, or in person or remotely, and pick what works for you. And if something changes, we can address that as need be.
Thank you very much. And so with that, we will move to our next agenda item, which is our discussion, direction, action on the city manager recruitment process and request for proposals for city manager recruitment. And so Mayor Pro Tem Maloney and I are presenting this topic this evening. So the council selected us to work together to bring back to you a process to consider, and here we are tonight. And so in front of you, you found a contract that is to request that we have a recruiting firm assist us with the process, and the firm would first, there would be identification of 2 council members to work with the city clerk to identify the firm that would be selected, and work closely with that firm once it's selected to go through some other steps. So they would include engaging with council members and community members and department heads to understand the qualities that we're looking for in a city manager. It would include, overview of the materials that would be used for recruiting this city manager. And then it would include a screening process for the first round, looking through all those applications that will come in, and all the way along the way providing feedback to the rest of the council. Any city manager recruitment is, of course, a process of the whole council. So we would all be included in the discussions and the ultimate selection and have access to all the materials and information. But we really need to identify 2 people that can work with staff and keep this flowing so that this isn't something that has to come to every council meeting and take a great deal of time. Mayor Pro Tem Maloney and I talked through a number of issues, and we've included them in that request for proposal for the consultant. So we hope we captured that well. But if there are any changes folks see in that RFP that they want to change some of the verbiage to make sure we get just the right types of consultants to come help us, please let us know. We can change that this evening. And if not, we'll get that issued and get a consultant coming right away. And so we need to tonight either approve the contract, approve the proposal as written, or make modifications to it and approve something. That's number 1. And number 2, we need to identify 2 council members that will help shepherd this process through the process. And my recommendation is that we pick a council member that'll be able to be with the process the entire time. And just given that it's late summer and this may go through the election season and past the election season, my recommendation is that it's a council member that's not involved in the election process or term limited, so that whoever volunteers can see this through. So I will make a proposal, and of course, you know, we can take nominations from the floor or have other requests, but I would propose nominating Mayor Pro Tem Maloney and Councilmember Fahey to take us through this process and ask if there are any council questions or comments on the RFP. And if there are none, then I would recommend that we approve that as well. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mayor Pro Tem Maloney to see if he has any additions to my presentation and if he'll accept my nomination.
I will accept your nomination. First off, thank you very much. You know, the contract, or at least the proposal that we put together, request for proposals, we did base it upon some things we've done in the past. And then we actually ran into just minor things along the way last time. And so the mayor and I edited what we had working with the city attorney. I think what we have is a solid RFP document to be able to take a look at proposals for this. And we are looking at a broader list than we did last time because we want council to really sort of guide this process. This will be, for many of us, the most important decision we make during our tenure of being on city council. Thank you, Mayor.
Certainly. And so we'll come right back to council comments, questions, feedback. But before that, I'll come to the members of the public that are still with us tonight and ask if any members of the public would care to comment on this agenda item. All right, seeing none, back to council. Questions, comments? Councilmember Lay.
I had just one question on section 3, which is, it's really the last, I guess it's, hold on, it may be only one sentence. I think that's all one sentence. But when you're talking about a diverse set of qualified applicants, there's just 3 characteristics there. And I'm sure that that's not meant to be exclusive, if you will, but I mean, it's not, there's a whole bunch of other potential characteristics that are being left out, including disability. And, you know, I guess I would just maybe, I could noodle some language, but I bet the city attorney could as well. I think I know what you're trying to get at, and I think it's good to have that language. I just found that sort of a little narrow.
Councilmember Lay, would you mind sharing a page number? I'm just not finding it yet.
Yes, it's 401.
Thank you, sir.
It's section Roman 3. It's the second to the last.
Yeah.
Line, that second paragraph.
Thank you. So I am comfortable, and I would want to maybe propose to see if other council members are comfortable with Councilmember Lay working with the city clerk and the city attorney to ensure that that language, I think we all understand what we're trying to get at there, but maybe it doesn't say it as well as possible, is what Councilmember Lay is pointing out. So if Councilmember Lay and the clerk and the attorney could work on that together, I don't think it would need to come back to council after that revision if everyone's comfortable with that. Yes, I see all head nods. All right, so Councilmember Lay, is that all right to give you that task offline?
Yep.
Thank you very much, sir. Appreciative. Is there any discussion about the proposal then to move forward with this RFP and to move forward with the subcommittee as proposed? All right, seeing none, is there consensus? Can I just get consensus from the group on the proposal moving forward? All right, Councilmember Dix. Okay, perfect. Everyone is in favor. Great. Thanks, everybody. And so we can move to our next agenda item. So we do have a few things left. They're first readings. I was trying to take a break every 2 hours. So we could take a break now because it's been 2 more hours, but we just have 3 first readings to go. Are people okay with continuing on? Yes.
Let's keep going.
Okay, just making sure. I was just trying to take a break every 2 hours. All right, so our next agenda item this evening is ordinance number 1810, series 2021, an ordinance submitting to the registered electors of the city at the November 2nd, 2021 regular municipal election, a ballot issue concerning increases in city debt and property taxes for the purpose of constructing transportation improvements and authorizing other actions regarding the conduct of such election. This is our first reading, and we're going to set the public hearing for the for July 27th, 2021. So I move to approve that first reading, and there's a second from Councilmember Lippin. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Thank you. The next item is ordinance number 1811, series 2021, an ordinance approving the first amendment to the ConocoPhillips Campus General Development Plan, Red Tail Ridge Master Plan, first reading, and to set the public hearing for July 27th, 2021. So moved. Is there a second? Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, everyone. And next is ordinance number 1812, series 2021, an ordinance reinstating provisions of the Louisville Municipal Code regarding penalties for non-payment of water charges. This is our first reading and we'll set the public hearing for July 27th, 2021. So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you, everyone. That takes us to our city attorney's report.
Thank you, Mayor. I have no report this evening.
Thank you, everyone. And I'll just ask folks to lay over any committee updates till the next meeting, unless folks have a pressing committee update they'd like to make tonight or a future agenda item that can't wait. Any council members have a comment they need to make this evening? All right, seeing none, thank you, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you again. I hope you all had a great vacation. We were adjourned.